Li Mei's Sword of Destiny. Chapter 3971. Phoenix Emperor Spring. The silent and oppressive atmosphere quietly spread. Everyone was waiting for another legendary figure. At this moment, sunlight finally passed through the pine tree and sprinkled on the girl's face, making her radiant. The pine tree can no longer cover me. The girl used her hand to block the sunlight from the sky and suddenly smiled. She gave up on teasing the squirrel and turned her gaze to the stairs. Pa! Almost at the same time, soft footsteps finally sounded. Under countless curious gazes, the young man who was rumored to be in the limelight had finally arrived. I'm here. Yes. After stepping on the mountain peak, the young man finally took off his cloak, revealing a clean and delicate face. He then smiled slightly. With just one sentence, everyone's heart subconsciously trembled, because they never thought that the young man could be so calm in this shocking battle. It was as if he was here to play. Sword God of Freedom and the others smiled. They knew that Lin Ling did not fly over but walked over. That was because he wanted to adjust his condition to the best stage. And from the looks of it, that kid seemed to be completely prepared. Lin Ling. Almost at the same time, everyone looked at Lin Ling, the #1 expert of Snow Wind Academy. His strength and talent were extremely powerful. It was said that he had several great talents and his reputation in the 36 academies wasn't weak. Originally, he should have a bright future. But for some reason, he agreed to fight with Longnyang. As for Longnyang, she was obviously more dazzling than Lin Ling. Not only was she the #1 newcomer, she was also the disciple of martial god Wen Tian. As the disciple of one of the top 10 martial gods in the 9 regions, this was a huge golden signboard. Now Lin Ling had come to accept the challenge. As one of the newcomers, would he be able to fight with Longnyang? Of course, many people were not optimistic about Lin Ling. The main reason was that in these 3 years, Longnyang had shone too brightly. Everyone knew where her limit was. Looking at Lin Ling, his glory was still at the E-Garden Exchange. Although there were rumors that Lin Ling was the overlord of Kai Yuan River, no one had seen his strength in Kai Yuan River. It was doubtful how strong he was. The title of overlord was only strong in the entire alliance. You're finally here. After a moment of silence, a voice finally floated out. Under an ancient pine tree, martial god Wen Tian sat there and calmly looked at Lin Ling. Of course, although he looked calm, he was actually a little surprised. This was because he did not expect Lin Ling to really come. He did not know where Lin Ling's confidence came from. This was because he could see that Lin Ling had not broken through to the martial god realm. Using the strength of a martial ancestor to fight with Longnyang, the difference was not small. There was only one outcome: defeat. If you lose, agree to my conditions. You will fulfill your promise. Martial god Wen Tian said again. I'm not like you. I'm a man of my words. Lin Ling smiled and slowly took off his cloak. A clean blue robe appeared, just as it had been in the past. This guy is really bold. Hearing Lin Ling's words, many people who saw Lin Ling for the first time were shocked. They did not expect Lin Ling to mock martial god Wen Tian. At the same time, in the sky around Phoenix Emperor Mountain, a large number of cultivators had gathered. They were also looking forward to the battle. As long as you agree. Martial god Wen Tian was not angry. He smiled and looked at Longnyang. However, he was not afraid that Lin Ling would go back on his words. As long as Lin Ling lost, he would have an excuse to attack Lin Ling and steal Lin Ling's secrets. Lin Ling sneered when he saw martial god Wen Tian's calm expression. He knew what martial god Wen Tian was planning. As a matter of fact, martial god Wen Tian had nothing to lose in this battle. If Lin Ling lost, martial god Wen Tian would get everything he wanted. If Longnyang lost, martial god Wen Tian would not have to pay any price. Therefore, martial god Wen Tian had spent a lot of effort to promote this battle, so that his name would be known throughout the world. As long as Lin Ling lost, he could not go back on his words. However, while he had his own wishful thinking, how could Lin Ling not have it? His goal was not just Longnyang. Moreover, how could Longnyang not have her own goal? If an opportunity presented itself, Longnyang would only have one choice, and that was to kill Lin Ling. She would not even care about martial god Wen Tian's words. I knew you would come. Longnyang stepped forward and waved her hand. A long sword made of clouds appeared in her hand. She held it at a slanted angle, giving her a sharp aura at this moment. Her pitch-black eyes stared at Lin Ling with a murderous aura. Lin Ling, have you reached the martial god realm? The tone that seemed to be used between friends also quietly floated out of her mouth. I want to say yes, but the truth is I haven't. Lin Ling's hand landed on the tyrannical song sword on his back and gently pulled it out. After the sword was revealed, compared to Longyang's sharp long sword, it was even thicker and as immovable as a mountain. Just like Lin Ling's current aura, it was calm and unwavering like an ancient well. No martial god realm. When the surrounding people heard Lin Ling's words, their eyes quietly flickered. Without a martial god realm, their chances of winning against Lin Ling had dropped to 10%. I believe that you won't lie at this moment. However, even if you haven't reached the martial god realm, I won't underestimate you. Longyang nodded. The sword in her hand finally pointed at the sky. A thread-like sword light shot out and landed on the blue dome of heaven. This sword seemed to have sounded the horn of war. Upon seeing this, Lin Ling also pointed his long sword at the dome of heaven. After the two of them pointed their swords at the sky above the Phoenix Emperor Mountain, the void immediately tore open. Then a huge whirlpool appeared and the sound of flowing water could be heard. It was extremely magical. The Phoenix Emperor Spring had been opened. Swoosh! Without further ado, Longyang took a step forward and shot into the void. Upon seeing this, Lin Ling did the same. That's the Phoenix Emperor Spring? Around the ancient mountain, many people began to discuss spiritedly. Then, they saw the powerful cultivators enter one after another. They had heard that the Phoenix Emperor Spring could only be entered but not exited. Even the top 10 martial gods of the 9 states would need 10 days to leave. Perhaps these powerful cultivators wanted to see more clearly, so they did not hesitate to waste 10 days to enter the Phoenix Emperor Mountain to observe the battle from a close distance. After the powerful cultivators entered, the black hole in the sky began to close up. However, the Sea Market's Chan Tower also appeared in the sky. Upon closer inspection, it was the scene inside the Phoenix Emperor Mountain, and it was being displayed clearly. This made many people happy because they could also witness the glory of that battle. The only regret was that they couldn't sense how ferocious the battle would be. Chapter 3972. Pure Heart Jade Maiden Divine Sword. What was even more shocking was that no one could see where the spring water came from, nor could they see where it disappeared. The people in the Phoenix the Arch Spring could only sense the sound of the spring water. It was extremely pleasing to the ears. Looking at the two people surrounded by the spring water, they were both floating there quietly. Their clothes fluttered in the wind as they stared at each other with sharp gazes. This was the battle for the number 1 best newcomer king. Both of them were on the celestial stairway of the gods list, but who would go higher? How big was the gap between Lin Ling and Longyang? Let's start. Suddenly a calm voice broke the calm of the storm. Whoosh! Almost at the same time, 2 figures approached from afar and collided violently. It's finally begun. Seeing that the storm had finally arrived, the people who had entered the Phoenix the Arch Spring narrowed their eyes. The unfettered sword martial god, Miao Di, and the others squinted their eyes. Although they didn't think highly of Lin Ling, they hoped that the gap between Lin Ling and Longyang wouldn't be so huge. On the other hand, the Duan family and the people of the new heavenly court were sneering. You overestimate yourself. Duan Wuhan was also in the crowd. He had a disdainful smile on his face. This Lin Ling has some ability, but he thinks too highly of himself. He thinks that if he is a genius, then others are not geniuses. Longyang is stronger than him. Lin Ling kicked an iron plate. Not far away, the true disciples of Miao Shen also had experts present. Naturally, Princess Tian was also present. She sneered again and again. I estimate that the outcome of this battle will be decided in less than 300 moves. At the same time, there were also experts who evaluated. Lin Ling has always been cunning. He must be hiding some trump card. However, for him to use his trump card within 300 moves, that should be enough. Is Lin Ling the only one who has hidden his trump card? Longyang is also hiding. More people began to assess the situation. These people were all martial gods. Although they couldn't see through Lin Ling's and Zhang Chen's strength, It wasn't difficult to guess that these two newcomer kings were definitely not as simple as they seemed on the surface. Boom! While people were talking, the two swords finally clashed at the center of the battlefield, causing a loud explosion. Surging realm essence gushed out from all directions with the two of them at the center. When it hit the spring water, countless echoes rang out. Pop! Pop! Looking at the center again, the two swords stirred up endless sparks as they clashed madly. The masters of the swords looked at each other, their cold eyes filled with a sharp light. Linling, are you still not going to use your full strength? Longyang's long hair fluttered in the wind. This was the first time they clashed, and she was also a little surprised in her heart. Because, although she did not erupt with her full strength, her boundary essence was very dense, and everyone who fought with her before knew that. However, after clashing with Linling, she was actually blocked by Linling. After all, Linling was only at the martial ancestor realm now. Most importantly, she guessed that Linling was definitely not using his full strength. You didn't even use your full strength, so why are you talking about me? Linling's tyrannical song sword buzzed as he looked at the woman in front of him and said. Longyang's sword was actually not much less surprised than Longyang because he had already activated the tyrannical song sword's ancestral power to the limit. However, under this sword, Longyang didn't move at all. Linling was confident that with the gravity of the dragon god armor, Linling, was confident that he could force an ordinary martial god realm expert to retreat. Her boundary essence is denser than I imagined. Moreover, she clearly didn't use her full strength. These thoughts flashed through Linling's mind. Linling, today you will definitely lose. Let's fight. At this moment, Longyang shouted sternly. The sword in her hand was withdrawn at lightning speed. Then she stabbed at Linling's face. Her speed was so fast that it had reached the speed of 2,000 boundaries. Linling's eyes flashed instantly. His body didn't move, but he tilted his head slightly. As soon as he moved, the cold sword stabbed at Linling's face. The sharp sword ray also left a sword mark on Linling's face. Blood flowed out silently. One could imagine that if this sword had pierced through, Linling's head would definitely have been pierced through. Of course, Longyang's strength wasn't limited to this. Seeing that her sword had failed, her expression didn't change. The sword that was originally stabbing suddenly slashed horizontally. This slash was also intended to cut off Linling's neck. Clang! At the crucial moment, Linling withdrew his sword and blocked Longyang's domineering slash with the Tyrant Song sword by his shoulder. Moreover, using Longyang's slash, Linling's figure flew to the left. However, just as he moved, Longyang arrived again. Her speed had reached 2,800 boundaries. The sky was filled with sword shadows flashing non-stop. The speed was so fast that it was dazzling. Longyang's speed is so fast. Linling is at a disadvantage in an instant. Those swords have all reached the peak of ancestral power. I didn't expect the gap between Linling and Longyang to be so big. They both cultivated bitterly for 3 years, but Linling is obviously weaker. Many people exclaimed as they watched the magnificent battle. Linling's speed seems to be slower than usual. The dean of the Snow Wind Academy and the others frowned. Back in the E-Garden, Linling had defeated Linling. At that time, the speed he displayed was obvious to all. However, now Linling's speed did not seem to have increased. This meant that in the past 3 years, Linling's strength had not increased by much. Longyang's sword is very fast and her speed is also very fast. Even if Linling's defense is strong, he can't withstand the consumption of time. Songchiri also said. His words made Yu and the others worried. Brother, will he be okay? Xiaoyu held the little hand of the sky-devouring sword and asked nervously. The sky-devouring sword was transformed from the sky-devouring sword. At this moment, it did not have the appearance of a proud little girl. Instead, it frowned and shook its head. Wandering the world. Under the moon. Drinking a little wine. Flying geese attack. The cold voice was like a divine chant. It drifted into the Phoenix Emperor Spring and combined with the sound of the spring water. It was like a beautiful melody. The voice naturally came from Longyang. Every sword of hers was fatal, causing Linling to look extremely miserable. Moreover, she did not show any mercy. The more she fought, the fiercer she became. Her speed was indeed very fast. Obviously, it was beyond what Linling could withstand at the moment. Could it be the pure heart of Jade Maiden Divine Sword? Looking at the dazzling sword technique, someone suddenly exclaimed. The person who spoke was Miao Di. Pure heart of Jade Maiden divine sword? Could it be the divine sword left behind by the Empress? Someone reacted and his expression changed drastically. This was because this sword was Luli Empress's famous sword. Back then, when the Empress was still very weak, she had used this sword to kill a martial god realm expert. Because of this, her name had shaken the final world. More importantly, this sword hand would form a strand of God's force in the end. Oh no, Lin Ling is in danger. Then the carefree sword martial god frowned and shouted. A strand of the power of a god, this was truly extraordinary. White rainbow across the sky. Zither and flute. Snow sweeping and tea brewing. Pine playing chess. Chess. Chapter 3973. Gap. In the end, the sword in her hand seemed to burn, and a strand of divine energy was finally released. Divine energy. This was a power that surpassed the ancestral energy. Up until now, many martial gods didn't have this power. Pure heart of heaven. Clang. Longyang's eyes were icy cold. She wanted to wash away all the humiliation and make that man disappear from this world. Clang. However, at this moment Lin Ling finally moved. What was terrifying was that he actually turned the tables. He gave up on defense and took the initiative to attack. The thick tyrannical song sword carried endless killing intent and demonic energy. It was like a dragon emerging from the sea as it spun continuously, and it actually stabbed towards Longyang's neck. This action undoubtedly shocked Longyang because Lin Ling had been defending before, but he suddenly counterattacked. Moreover, the timing of his counterattack had reached an instant. Because this moment was the time for the pure heart of Jade Maiden sword to condense divine energy. Dream on. Clang. Longyang shouted in a low voice. The sword in her hand had just moved, but Lin Ling's sword arrived in the next moment. Moreover, what was shocking was that the seemingly thick sword wasn't clumsy at all. The sword was like a dragon, and it suddenly gave up on stabbing towards Longyang's neck and stabbed towards Longyang's sword instead. Even Dragon Mother couldn't react to this sudden change in situation. Clang! Longyang's sword was stabbed, and the divine energy that had just been condensed instantly dissipated a little. Good eyesight. Clang! Longyang shouted in a low voice. She was shocked. Why did she feel that Lin Ling seemed to be very familiar with the pure heart of Jade Maiden's sword? He was actually able to break her sword. Fortunately, although Lin Ling's eyesight was powerful, he was still too weak in the end. He couldn't cause any waves. Whoosh! Therefore, Longyang borrowed Lin Ling's sword and floated back. You won't let me attack, but I'll attack. Longyang also knew that Lin Ling had interrupted her attack, which meant that he was very afraid of her. And the more he was like this, the more Longyang had to attack. Taking a step in the air, Longyang was as graceful as an immortal. Her sword was like a flying immortal as she charged towards Lin Ling. Alright. Seeing this sudden scene, countless people outside the Phoenix Emperor Spring cheered. This was because they had clearly seen Longyang flying backwards, but no one had expected her to immediately attack again after flying back a dozen meters. This kind of unexpected move was often difficult to guard against. And this sword cut through the void, severing the surrounding spring water. It actually contained a wisp of the power of divinity. At this moment, countless people widened their eyes, wanting to see how Lin Ling would deal with this. However, some people had already begun to think that Lin Ling was about to lose, but there were also people who thought that it was time for Lin Ling to use his trump card. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. However, at this moment countless true dark swords flew out from behind Lin Ling. They swept through the sky like immortal swords, sweeping through everything. True dark swords. Wentian martial god's eyes lit up when he saw Lin Ling skillfully controlling these flying swords. He was naturally very familiar with these swords, but his lips curled into a disdainful smile. He knew that these swords couldn't block Longyang's attack. Clang 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 clang. The truth was as such. Longyang's sword swept away all the true dark swords. However, these swords were like carps crossing a river. They continued to shoot towards Longyang. In the end, they were heated up by the impact of Longyang's sword. People guessed that they would be destroyed. On the other hand, the true dark swords couldn't stop Longyang at all. This caused Longyang's sword to get closer and closer to Lin Ling. It seemed like if Lin Ling didn't do something, he would be defeated immediately. However, at the critical moment it was still the True Inheritance Dark Sword that danced in the air. But this time, the True Inheritance Dark Sword that had been burned seemed to have been activated. It completely disappeared from Lin Ling's hand, leaving a long sword in Lin Ling's left hand. It was a 2-meter-long sword. Lin Ling's lips curled into a cold smile as he crossed his two swords. He didn't retreat and counterattacked. He charged forward. At this moment he finally revealed a bit of his strength. If one had to give an example, then his calm heart was like a calm ocean. However, at this moment, the ocean was quietly surging with waves. After all, no matter how calm the ocean was, it would still have a moment of turbulence. Clang! Longyang's sword finally stabbed at the place where Lin Ling's two swords crossed. After that, it couldn't move an inch further. This collision caused terrifying sparks to fly everywhere like meteors, causing the spectators to open their mouths wide. He blocked it. Lin Ling actually blocked Longyang's strand of divine energy. One must know that strand of divine energy was very powerful. It could easily kill a first-level martial god. Lin Ling, you're amazing. Seeing that Lin Ling had resolved the crisis, the principal of Snow Wind Academy couldn't help but shout. Previously, she was worried to death. However, she didn't expect Lin Ling to have such ability. Moreover, Lin Ling was able to block Longyang's sword. This meant that Lin Ling's sword probably contained a strand of divine energy. How is this possible? Compared to everyone's shock, martial god Wen Tian's body trembled. The true dark sword's divine energy was activated? How was this possible? One must know that his father, martial god Qilin, had once wanted to activate the divine energy within the sword. However, after thousands of years he had failed in the end. Both father and son even believed that the true dark sword didn't have divine energy. However, a miracle had appeared before his eyes. The true dark sword did indeed possess divine energy. Most importantly, it was activated by a junior. He knew very well that even though the True Inheritance Nether Sword was in Lin Ling's hand, and even though Lin Ling was able to utilize 10% of its divine energy, because Lin Ling's cultivation was too low, that divine energy couldn't be considered to be huge. However, if the person holding the sword was him, or even his father, then that divine energy was no small matter. Lin Ling is indeed related to him. Then martial god Wen Tian became even more excited. He was sure of something. Longyang found that her sword couldn't move forward anymore. Her eyes sharpened. Although she knew that Lin Ling wasn't as simple as she thought, she didn't expect Lin Ling to possess divine energy. This must be your trump card. Unfortunately, you've used your trump card, but I haven't. Longyang looked coldly at the handsome young man in front of her and said, Pure Heart Jade Maiden Divine Sword. If the momentum is interrupted, then the divine power will continue to dissipate. I think that the sword in your hand is no longer sharp. Lin Ling raised his head and said indifferently. Longyang's eyes flickered. Lin Ling was indeed familiar with the Pure Heart Divine Sword of Jade Maiden. This guy was too strange. She didn't know that the sword was given to Luli Empress by Li Xiaoyao. How could Lin Ling not be familiar with it? Now break it. Lin Ling's eyes flashed with anger when he thought of the owner of the Pure Heart Divine Sword of Jade Maiden. He crossed his hands and slashed with the divine sword like a pair of sharp scissors. Gotcha! Cracks immediately appeared on the sword in Dragon Lady's hand, causing her expression to change. She frantically retreated, and after retreating a few hundred meters, her sword shattered like glass. Chapter 3974. Mighty Divine Axe. It's a very sharp sword, but do you think that's all I have? Don't forget how I've spent all these years. For the sake of today's battle, I've spent my entire life's effort. Floating in the air, Longyang quickly turned cold again. She was the #1 newcomer king. How could she be so simple on the surface? Axe! She pointed her hand at the sky and let out a low shout. Mysterious runes appeared and hovered in the sky. Finally, they were engraved in the sky. It was as if a void had been opened. Then a huge black axe fell from the void. It kept spinning and finally landed in Longyang's hand. This giant axe was over 2 meters tall and completely black. Not only was the head of the axe huge, even the handle was 2 meters long. On the handle, there were a large number of ferocious divine runes. The appearance of this axe alone was enough to intimidate others. The most frightening thing was that such a huge axe was being held by a delicate beauty. This added a different kind of beauty to it. I obtained the ancestral breaking sand axe from One World Mountain. This axe weighs the power of 1,000 worlds and is 2.5 meters long. The handle of the axe is forged from golden spirit satin sand and ancient heavenly water. The axe head is engraved with countless barriers and contains the soul of 10,000 tigers. When it is swung, the roar of tigers will shake the heavens. Longyang's dress fluttered in the wind. She held the giant axe in her hand and waved it slightly. Roar! A tiger's roar immediately rang out, shaking everyone's eardrums to the point of pain. I forgot to mention this is a grade 5 innate divine weapon. It can increase the wielder's power by 10,000 worlds. If it's infused with world essence, its power will be even more terrifying. Longyang stared coldly at Lin Ling after brandishing her sword. She was like a goddess of war. Your defense is very strong. Let's see if your defense is stronger or if my strength is stronger. Bang! She stepped on the void, holding the axe with one hand as she charged toward Lin Ling. In the air, she waved the divine axe, cutting through the void with unparalleled power. What was even more frightening was that the gigantic divine axe in her hands actually looked extremely light. So beautiful. Longyang's unique style undoubtedly made many young men lick their lips. You're really amazing. You're worthy of being called a genius who can match me. I Lin Ling rarely admire anyone in my life. You Longyang are the first. Lin Ling's eyes narrowed as he looked at the war godlike woman. He gripped his sword with both hands and clashed with her. Rumble. However, the godly axe seemed to be able to split the heavens and earth apart as it fiercely chopped down. It actually carried a destructive force that directly sent Lin Ling flying backwards. If it wasn't for the toughness of his two swords, it was likely that he would have been killed by the axe. This axe was truly worthy of being a weapon capable of splitting mountains and seas. This axe was forged according to One World Mountain's One World axe. How can you block it? After sending Lin Ling flying, Longyang snorted coldly and chased after Lin Ling again. She waved the giant axe again. Her speed was clearly not something Lin Ling could contend with at the moment. Therefore, Lin Ling was quickly caught up and drowned in the wind created by the giant axe. The power of God. Moreover, every time he blocked Longyang's attack, Lin Ling was shocked because the axe in Longyang's hand actually also possessed the power of God. Moreover, it was even more powerful than the sword from before. After all, the sword required a sword technique to activate the power of God. However, this axe didn't need that. Of course, the power of God was only one of the reasons. Lin Ling saw that every time Longyang waved the axe, black sand would sprinkle out. Not only could it dazzle the opponent's eyes, the black sand also possessed a fatal power that could completely break the opponent's power of ancestor. This meant that Lin Ling's power of ancestor was completely useless at this moment. It's too late to realize it now. Longyang looked at the somewhat embarrassed man in front of her. She seemed to know Lin Ling's thoughts and the corners of her mouth immediately curled into a sinister sneer. She waved the giant axe violently and continuously suppressed Lin Ling. So powerful. Everyone stared fixedly at this scene and even stopped breathing. The number one newcomer king was truly terrifying. The momentum of the axe is too strong. If this continues, Lin Ling's defense will definitely be broken. I didn't expect Longyang's attack to be so terrifying that it could break Lin Ling's defense. Yes. This was because they saw with their own eyes that fragments of the divine armor were constantly sprinkling out from Lin Ling's body. Obviously, it was cut by Longyang's divine axe. They could imagine that if it wasn't for that set of divine armor, Lin Ling would have been killed. Of course, this kind of overbearing attack was undoubtedly extremely pleasing to the eye. And it happened to be from the body of a beautiful woman. This also caused the outside world to cheer again and again. Beautiful, too beautiful. Longyang, I love you to death. Yes. At this moment I've turned from a fan to a fan. I'll be fascinated by Longyang for the rest of my life. Damn Lin Ling, why don't you admit defeat? Yes. Yeah, when Longyang domineeringly waved the axe just now, I saw her panties. I was fascinated to death. Yes. Many young men licked their lips and kept shouting. Even some of the good-looking women were shocked by Longyang's majestic figure. Of course, their hearts were also filled with jealousy. Humph, a woman using an axe. How rude. I have high hopes for Lin Ling. Cheers. Lin Ling, you can do it. But I see that Lin Ling's clothes have been cut to pieces. If this continues, I'm afraid his life will be in danger. Who said that? Who said that? Don't you know Lin Ling's prestige in Tongtian Tower and his pride in Yi Garden? He's definitely not that simple. Cheers. The women chattered as they stared at the blue-robed young man in the sky. Although the young man was in a sorry state in their eyes, he was extremely handsome. The various voices of the outside world were not affected by the Phoenix Emperor Spring at all. At this moment the battle here was like a storm. Strong winds swept everywhere. Clang! 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 The azure armor on Lin Ling's body kept shattering. The armor could withstand 50% of a half-step to Martial God's attack and 3 fatal attacks from an initial stage Martial God. However, at this moment, it could not withstand Longyang's mighty axe. This meant that each of Longyang's attacks was an initial stage Martial God's fatal attack. Boom! Finally, a loud explosion sounded from Lin Ling's body. Everyone saw that the armor had exploded. At this moment many people sighed. Lin Ling's armor had been destroyed. How could he continue to fight? Longyang's lips curled into a disdainful smile. She also temporarily stopped attacking. Looking at Lin Ling again, he was panting like a cow. His eyes were solemn as he looked at Dragon Mother. He didn't expect this woman to be so ferocious that she could actually break his divine armor. Of course, Lin Ling had many sets of armor on him. However, they were all hidden. Furthermore, Lin Ling did not intend to use any treasures to fight against Longyang. He only relied on his own strength because he wanted to test his own strength. Chapter 3975. Who said that battle armor was used for defense? Hehe, in the past you have always been above me. Now I have surpassed you. Moreover, the gap between us is not small. Longyang's pretty face was filled with endless pride and glory. The reason why she did not continue to attack was that she also wanted to savor this proud achievement. Only she knew how difficult it was to surpass Lin Ling. For the time being, Lin Ling did not comment and slowly took off the battle armor on his body. This made everyone stunned again. This Lin Ling was actually wearing 2 sets of battle armor. He was too shameless. After all, not long ago, they had witnessed Lin Ling's battle armor being destroyed. Longyang did not wear a single set of battle armor. This Lin Ling as a man actually wore 2 sets of battle armor. Trash. On the Duan family's side, Duan Wuhan immediately said sarcastically, 2 sets of battle armor? Longyang's mouth also outlined a disdainful smile. She did not expect that Lin Ling was afraid of her to this extent. It seemed that in these 3 years, Lin Ling's strength had improved very little. Then Longyang said lightly, "Do you think that 2 sets of battle armor can block my attack?" Lin Ling, I have to say that my evaluation of you has suddenly dropped a point. You must know that you used to be my idol. For a long time, Lin Ling's weight in Longyang's heart was very high. However, in this battle, Longyang was very disappointed in Lin Ling. Lin Ling gave her a feeling of powerlessness, as if he was very weak, which made it difficult for her to enjoy. After all, she did not want this battle to be one-sided from the beginning. Of course, this could not be blamed on Lin Ling. Perhaps Longyang's strength had improved too much, so she had this illusion. Hearing Longyang's words, many people in the outside world also cursed. This was because a mere Lin Ling was actually Longyang's idol. Lin Ling was nothing. Humph, he's just a declining genius. Just him? I saw his previous appearance, he was as weak as a dog. I really don't understand why he wants to fight with Longyang. Doesn't he have any self-awareness? Both of them have worked hard for 3 years, but Lin Ling, alas, he is disappointing. Many people spoke disdainfully. However, Lin Ling, who was in the Phoenix Emperor Spring, did not hear what the outside world was saying. In fact, he did not even seem to have heard Dragon Mother's words. He continued to slowly remove the armor on his body. This armor was the divine dragon armor. Have you given up? Without the battle armor, you will lose even faster. If I were you, I would rather let this battle armor be destroyed. After all, there is at least some hope. Longyang looked over and spoke indifferently. The silent Lin Ling gave her the feeling that he was down and out. Who says I've given up? However, at this moment, Lin Ling looked up slightly and said casually, since you haven't given up, why don't you even want the battle armor? I think you are just stubborn. Long Yang immediately laughed disdainfully. However, just as she finished speaking, her smile froze. This was because she saw Lin Ling take off the shoulder pads of the battle armor and casually throw them away. Then he muttered to himself, alas, if I want to wear it again after taking it off, I will have to start all over again. Of course, this sentence was not a big deal. The main thing was that Long Yang saw that after the shoulder pads smashed into the sky exploded with an explosive sound. Rumble. The sound was like a meteor crashing down, echoing countless times. This also caused the pupils of the people outside to freeze. From their point of view, the impact of the shoulder pads was not much weaker than that of Long Yang's axe. Next, Lin Ling threw out the left shoulder pads. Rumble. Ripples appeared in the void. Next, the breastplate and knee pads. Everyone held their breaths as they watched Lin Ling continuously throw out the battle armor. It was as if bombs had been thrown into their hearts. Long Yang's beautiful eyes narrowed. Because she was the closest to Lin Ling, she could naturally feel the weight of the armor. Who said that the battle armor is used for defense? At this moment, Lin Ling finally took off all the Dragon God battle armor. He found that a terrifying force was diffusing from his body. He also found that the talents of the double Dragon God had improved. One had reached the 4th grade and the other had reached the 6th grade. The improvement of the double Dragon God's talents brought about a continuous chain of reactions. His physical strength had also improved. The power of the Great Solar Calamity Bow had also increased. In addition, the Dragon God battle armor had cultivated his physical strength during this period. Currently, Lin Ling's physical strength had reached the power of 40,000 worlds. Who said that the battle armor is used for defense? Long Yang recalled Lin Ling's words. Her eyes were constantly flickering. However, suddenly, her beautiful eyes trembled violently. She vaguely guessed something. However, when she raised her eyes, the sky in front of her suddenly burst open like water. When she reacted, a figure had appeared in front of her. He was smiling at her with his hands behind his back. Fast. Incomparably fast. This speed was definitely above the 3,000 worlds. Involuntarily, Long Yang hurriedly looked at the battle armor in the distance that Lin Ling had thrown out. Her heart roared. Could it be that Lin Ling had been carrying that heavy battle armor while fighting with her? Was this the reason why Lin Ling's speed was so slow? It was also the reason why Lin Ling gave her the feeling that he was so weak. It turned out that the battle armor didn't provide defense. Instead, it was a burden. The funny thing was that she thought that Lin Ling without the battle armor would be even weaker. However, the ironic thing was that without the battle armor, Lin Ling without the battle armor was more like a monster who had broken the taboo. Impossible! Long Yang roared angrily. The divine axe in her right hand fiercely slashed down. She seemed to want to prove something. Boom! However, Lin Ling stretched out his hands and suddenly clamped them. The giant divine axe was clamped, and it couldn't be cut down anymore. Using his hands to clamp the divine axe, this strength was terrifying. Moreover, Lin Ling's hands slightly exerted force. The ferocious divine axe emitted a squeaking sound. Under countless dumbfounded gazes, it quietly bent. Seeing this, Long Yang's heart exploded. The eyes of the surrounding experts widened. In the outside world, the people who had previously looked down on Lin Ling all sucked in a breath of cold air. This was because many of them knew how terrifying Long Yang's godly axe was, especially the experts who had returned from One World Mountain. It could be said that even a first-level martial god couldn't withstand a single blow from the axe. However, Lin Ling had blocked it with his hands. It seemed like this guy wanted to hold the god-bursting axe with his bare hands. It's him. Someone mumbled to himself. His eyes were fixed on the sky. It was as if he could see the originally weak young man suddenly soar into the sky. His brilliance would illuminate the world. The newcomer King Lin Ling to be called the newcomer king. His strength wasn't just an undeserved reputation. Your strength is quite weak. At this moment, Lin Ling had no idea what the crowd was thinking. Instead, he was feeling the power that was constantly being produced in his body. His heart was becoming more and more excited. Chapter 3976. Long Yang defeated? At the moment of release, he felt a sharp feeling in his heart. Fight! Fight to his heart's content. Let's test the limits. Lin Ling shouted. His hands were still holding the divine axe, but his power was constantly released, as if two dragons were coiling around the divine axe. Rumble! Along with the shock of his power, the void began to tremble. The surrounding spring water began to ripple, as if it was trembling. Everyone seemed to have seen a giant, reversing the universe at this moment. As for Longyang, she had already abandoned the divine axe and retreated. Her face was filled with shock, and her heart felt humiliated, because she actually looked down on Lin Ling. Sure enough, Lin Ling was never as simple as she thought. Daring to look down on this person, the price was very heavy. Boom! Under countless gazes, the divine axe exploded, forcibly held by Lin Ling, and the sparkling fragments in the void were like stars twinkling. Everyone was shocked. Even a 5th grade innate divine weapon was destroyed. This Lin Ling is simply a monster. The eyes of the Snow Wind Academy's principal were wide open, and for a moment, they were so shocked that they were speechless, and their evaluation of Lin Ling also increased by a point. After 3 years of bitter cultivation, the gap between Lin Ling and Longyang was not as far as they had imagined. Among everyone, only Ynue was not surprised by this matter, but she also revealed an excited smile. Whoosh! Lin Ling gently blew away the sparkling fragments in his hand, and looked at Longyang and said indifferently, "If you want to play other things, you still have some ability, but when it comes to axes and physical strength, to be honest, you know nothing about strength." This voice was filled with pride and arrogance, and also a trace of indifference and cynicism. It was as if the Lin Ling of the past had returned. He was still as dazzling, as all-powerful as ever. In the distance, Longyang's face also became serious. She finally felt a sense of seriousness. This was the beginning of the battle, and what happened before was just a warm-up. It was as if Lin Ling was a sleeping dragon in the abyss, and when he was sleeping, she, Longyang, was complacent, but now the dragon has finally awakened. Damn it! She had actually made a big mistake, and was fooled by Lin Ling, and dared to look down on Lin Ling. Lin Ling, I underestimated you. Longyang enunciated each word clearly. Her eyes became even more serious. Although she still didn't think that Lin Ling was her opponent, at least she believed that Lin Ling wasn't as simple as he seemed. Since it has been solved, then there is no need to hide any more strength. Hearing this, Lin Ling also shook his head and said. His words were obviously not an answer to the question, but more to himself. That was because, ever since he returned, he had been constantly calming his heart, but he had a feeling that with the dragon god armor removed, the curtains of this battle had been raised. It was also because after removing the armor, it meant that Lin Ling could no longer turn back. It meant that there was no turning back on his path of becoming a deity. Therefore, he just had to bravely move forward. Waves could be stirred up in the calm sea, but there would be a day when monstrous waves would be stirred up. Calamity destroying Sun Bao. With a wave of his right hand, the aura of the dragon god spread out, and the Sanskrit was even more deafening. On Lin Ling's body, endless Buddhist light bloomed and quietly turned into a huge dragon bow. The bow was 10 meters long and terrifying. When Lin Ling held it, endless power of the heavenly dragon Buddha god flowed on the bowstring, forming a dazzling light. Everyone looked at the godlike man in shock, shocked by the divine bow. Longyang, you can look down on anyone, but underestimating me, Lin Ling, is the biggest mistake in your life. Although you have worked hard all your life, you are below me once. No matter how hard you work, you will always be below me. Now let's fight. A hot-blooded voice finally floated out, just like the moment Lin Ling removed the armor. There was no turning back. The 6th arrow. What is 5? 1. Suffering day and night, leading to calamity. 2. 1 is full, many are full. 3. The sin weapon, the trident, the eagle, snake, wolf, and dog. 4. Dragon, god, sky, and ghost. 5. If you fall into this prison, 10,000 deaths and 10,000 lives. 6. Connected by this is called seamless. Seamless. Without waiting for Longyang to speak, a dazzling black and white arrow was shot out, sprinkling endless Buddhist light, shooting towards Longyang at a terrifying speed. Longyang's pupils constricted, and then she was drowned in the endless Buddhist light. That black and white arrow was like the key to opening the Buddhist kingdom and the underworld. causing the entire Phoenix Emperor Spring to tremble. Even some martial gods were frightened, afraid of the power of this junior. Looking at the dazzling scene on the Phoenix Emperor Mountain, the outside world stopped breathing, and there was only one sentence in their hearts. Was Longyang going to lose? They obviously didn't expect that in these 3 years, although Longyang's strength had greatly increased, and she had won the title of newcomer king, Lin Ling had not wasted his time. Without martial god Wen Tian as his backer, Lin Ling could still make a name for himself by relying on himself. Rumble. The black and white arrow was like the end of the world, constantly stirring the Phoenix Emperor Spring, causing the void to seem like it was about to collapse. In the Phoenix Emperor Spring, all the experts looked at the shocking scene in front of them, and their faces were incomparably solemn. Especially the experts from the Duan clan and the New Heavenly Court, they suddenly felt an incomparably huge pressure. Obviously, Lin Ling's sudden display of strength had caught them off guard, greatly exceeding their expectations. This kid's growth speed is really crazy. Back then, outside of East City, he hadn't even stepped into the 300th place on the Divine Stairway. However, in just 3 short years, I'm afraid he has already entered the 200th place on the Divine Stairway. Martial god Wen Tian's eyes stared straight ahead, and said solemnly, to a martial artist, 3 years was nothing more than the blink of an eye. However, there were some heaven-defying martial artists that were extremely powerful. In the blink of an eye, they could reverse the universe and create a miracle. And Lin Ling was one of them. Longyang has martial god Wen Tian's focus on nurturing, but Lin Ling seems to have nothing. Not only Wen Tian martial god, even the deans of the 36 academies and other experts were staring fixedly at the young man who was showing off his ability. Then they all looked at the Snow Wind Academy's dean at the same time, their eyes filled with jealousy. The Snow Wind Academy is really lucky. Obviously, these deans were incomparably envious of the Snow Wind Academy for giving birth to such a freak. Did he win? As the sound waves gradually weakened, someone finally let out a solemn voice. How terrifying was the arrow from before? Probably not many people in the early stage of the martial god realm could block it, so no one was sure if Longyang was still alive. Even Lin Ling was not sure, but he had a feeling in his heart that Longyang should not be so simple. How could the number 1 genius Longyang, who was below him and had been chasing after him, be defeated so easily? Chapter 3977. Longyang's 4 Dantians. Ka. Almost at the same time, circles of powerful ripples bloomed, cutting off the distant spring water, forming a terrifying wave of air. The wave of air rushed over. Even Lin Ling's figure was a little unstable. One must know he now had the power of 40,000 worlds. This also meant that if those airwaves hit the myriad worlds would instantly collapse. Its realm essence. What a rich realm essence. Lin Ling's pupils suddenly became serious. He sensed that the wave of air was formed by Jieyuan, and this meant that the wave of air was extremely terrifying. Then Lin Ling immediately looked into the distance. He saw a huge light shield in the distance. It was slowly descending, and within the light shield, he could vaguely see the figure of a woman. The woman's head was slightly lowered, and her body was trembling. However, she gave people the feeling that she was an awakening god. This scene undoubtedly caused Lin Ling's pupils to constrict. There was only one voice in his heart. For Dantians, martial god Wen Tian actually taught the first few stages of the primal chaos formula to Longyang. One must know that in his previous life, Li Xiaoyao treated the 3 members of the Tian family as family, so he taught them the first 5 stages of the primal chaos formula. As for Tian Liuli, she probably obtained the 6th stage of the formula, and was able to form 6 Dantians. When Tian martial god had obviously hidden his strength and did not send over a 5th layer cultivation technique. However, even if it was the 4 Dantians, the density of the world essence was not something that the current Lin Ling could withstand. For example, it would be the force of the 4th layer martial god realm, and it was stronger than an ordinary 4th layer martial god realm cultivator. That's good. If I fail too quickly, I won't be able to enjoy myself to the fullest. Thinking of this, Lin Ling's eyes also flashed with a strong fighting spirit. What a powerful world essence energy. At almost the same time, the experts from the Phoenix Emperor Spring sensed the change in Longyang. How is this still Jieyuan of the early stage of the martial god realm? It's comparable to the middle stage of the martial god realm. How can this Longyang be so strong? Could it be him? Many famous experts subconsciously looked at martial god Wentian, especially unrestrained sword martial god and the others, because only they knew where martial god Wentian's strength came from. It was precisely his endless and dense world essence. And now Longyang's world essence was also boundlessly dense. This meant that martial god Wentian had passed his mantle to Longyang. Wentian martial god is really going all out for this battle, Miao Di said solemnly. Wang. As soon as she finished speaking, the huge light barrier finally exploded. Then a delicate figure slowly walked out. Although she looked delicate, her aura was so terrifying that it made people tremble in fear. How was this a delicate woman? She was simply an empress. In particular, some of the old monsters could vaguely see Luli Empress's figure on that woman. As expected, Dragon Mother didn't lose. Although we can't sense any ripples of boundary essence here, I reckon that she has used a trump card now. Her strength is probably twice as strong as before. It's not just doubled, it's quadrupled. That's because Longyang had also used her trump card in the One World Mountain. At that time she had already defeated all the top 200 experts on the divine list. In the end, there are less than 100 people who can surpass her in the world of 36 academies. The experts in the outside world gasped at this moment. Their eyes were filled with respect and envy as they looked at the sky. This was the #1 newcomer king. Everyone could clearly sense her strength. Even the genius experts who had lost to Longyang 3 years ago knew that the gap between them and Longyang had widened after 3 years. Whoosh! Longyang's long hair fluttered in the wind as she quietly looked at Lin Ling. At this moment she looked a little miserable. It was obvious that she had suffered a great loss from the previous arrow. I'm sorry. Finally, Longyang spoke softly. Why? Lin Ling looked calmly at Longyang. His expression gradually recovered from the initial shock. Because I have underestimated you. However, you have awakened me once again and reminded me of who my opponent is. Therefore, I apologize for underestimating you previously. Longyang's fine black hair fluttered in the wind. Her exquisite face carried an indescribable dignity. At this moment, she was like the king of the 3 halls in the 36 academies. No need. It's okay to be serious now. Lin Ling shrugged his shoulders as the energy in his body surged. He knew that there would be a tough battle ahead. Thank you. Then I'll be serious. Longyang nodded. Although her voice sounded soft, it was filled with endless confidence. Bang! The sky where she was suddenly exploded. Longyang disappeared from the sky and reappeared in front of Lin Ling. Her jade-like hand turned into a claw and was as sharp as a sword. She suddenly turned towards Lin Ling. Although this claw seemed calm, it actually carried an unparalleled power of boundary essence. When he saw this, a pair of swords appeared in Lin Ling's hands. He raised them high and suddenly slashed down. Clang! However, when the pair of swords that carried a wisp of divine energy and 40,000 boundary essence slashed down on Longyang's arm, it was actually blocked by a powerful force. If one looked carefully, one would see that there was a faint layer of boundary essence around Longyang's arm that protected her arm. However, this seemingly thin layer of boundary essence had an extremely terrifying defensive power. Lin Ling's eyes flashed instantly. Longyang, who had fused her 4 dantians, was indeed terrifying. Lin Ling was certain that even if he had fused his 6 dantians, in terms of the density of boundary essence, he was definitely not a match for her. Unless Lin Ling had also stepped into the martial god realm. Bang! Lin Ling stomped his foot in the sky and instantly retreated. Obviously, it was extremely unwise to confront Longyang head-on at this time. However, Longyang, who had fused her 4 dantians, had reached the speed of 4,000 boundary essence. She followed closely behind Lin Ling. Her claw was aimed at Lin Ling's neck. If it hit, Lin Ling's neck would be crushed in an instant. As Lin Ling retreated, he crossed his swords in front of him. However, the 2 swords shook very quickly. Then Lin Ling saw Longyang's claw grabbing the tyrannical song sword and ruthlessly pulling it away. Since she could even grab the tyrannical song sword, this method could be said to be unparalleled. Lin Ling had no choice but to abandon his sword. Currently, the only advantage he had that was not inferior to Longyang was his speed. Clang! 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 Longyang's attacks were like a storm, closing in on Lin Ling. Every move was fatal. As she waved her claws, the surrounding spring water was all cut off. What a fast speed! Lin Ling is suddenly at a disadvantage. Chapter 3978. Divine Embryo Body. For Dantians, what a terrifying thing. Combining the power of 4 martial gods into one body, this kind of power is too unfair to ordinary cultivators. How can there be fairness in this world? Have you thought about the cultivators of the 9 prefectures when you say these words? In their eyes you are so strong, how can there be fairness? No matter what, with the 4 Dantians, Longyang is already the strongest among us. All kinds of voices floated out from the outside world and the Phoenix Emperor Spring. The deans of the 36th College also looked at Wentian martial god. Obviously, they knew that Longyang was so powerful because of Wentian martial god. Wentian martial god smiled and did not speak. Instead, he quietly watched the intense battle in front of him. Lin Ling, who was in the center, was undoubtedly being suppressed by Longyang. However, Lin Ling's physical defense was strong, and he was not defeated in a short period of time. However, everyone could see that it was only a matter of time before Lin Ling was defeated. Lin Ling, I don't know if you have used all your strength, but if this is all you have, then there is no need to continue this battle. Longyang's voice was extremely cold as she continued to attack. Following that, all of his realm essence surged, transforming into a giant claw that grabbed towards Lin Ling from all directions. Seeing this, Lin Ling naturally knew that he could not avoid this moment, because if he continued to dodge, he would be defeated even faster. Therefore, he suddenly gritted his teeth and his gaze became crazier. No one knew that while he was fighting Longyang, he was also frantically refining the treasures. This was because, with a strong opponent like Longyang, she was in fact constantly pressuring him, causing his refining speed to double. Of course, the advantage was that the speed was faster, but the disadvantage was also obvious. If Lin Ling was careless, it was very likely that he would be seriously injured by Longyang. Lin Ling had dared to do so as he was extremely confident in himself. He also wanted to maximize the power of the half-martial god pill, so that his strength would reach the martial god realm when he unsealed the pill. At present, Lin Ling's intuition told him that he was still lacking a little, so let the storm come even fiercer. True. Transmission of Hades. After refining a large number of treasures, Lin Ling gripped the True Inheritance dark sword with both hands. That strand of divine power was stimulated to the peak, and the entire sword began to hum. Lin Ling's sword is so dazzling. This scene was clearly noticed by countless people. Their blood suddenly boiled because in their guesses, perhaps this battle had finally reached its peak. Leader, you must win. On the Phoenix Emperor Mountain, countless experts from the God-Slayer Alliance were shouting. They only had a rough idea of Lin Ling's strength. They knew that Lin Ling had defeated the newcomer king of Fengyun Tower. However, how could the newcomer king compare to Longyang? Almost at the same time, Lin Ling's sword began to hum. His entire body turned into a sword, and with terrifying power he slashed at the huge claw. Rumble! Pop! Pop! The collision of the two forces was enough to drown any initial stage martial god. Clang! However, after the huge celestial sword clashed with the terrifying claw, it could not withstand the pressure and broke apart. It turned into 18 True Inheritance dark swords, and they lay in the void dimly. Looking at Lin Ling, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His figure was also sent flying, crashing into the void in the distance, causing ripples to appear in the void. Silence. The outside world and the Phoenix Emperor Spring were dead silent. Everyone stared at the True Inheritance dark swords in the void, and they frowned even more. This was because they saw that Lin Ling seemed to have been defeated. Until now, the two swords that Lin Ling possessed had been destroyed by Longyang. Finally, he has lost. Someone murmured to himself. Even so, Lin Ling is terrifying enough to make Longyang explode with such strength. Hence, I am sure that Lin Ling's strength is in the top 200 of the divine list. Most importantly, this guy is also a newcomer. He is the only one below Longyang who can reach such a height. someone said in admiration. In the Phoenix Emperor Spring, Lin Ling wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were solemnly looking at Longyang. Longyang possessed 4 dantians, and her boundary origin was indeed powerful. However, what surprised Lin Ling was that Longyang's 4 dantians were not ordinary dantians. This also meant that Longyang had a powerful innate talent. This attack has made the vortex in my dantian absorb more energy at a faster rate. Hurry up. I don't want you to be a half-step to martial god when the pill is removed. So don't disappoint me. Lin Ling stood still in silence. However, there was a hint of madness in his eyes, and he kept shouting in his heart. Is that all? 3 years. Do you know that I have waited for 3 years? However, is that all you have? At that moment, Longyang suddenly spoke in a cold voice. There was a hint of madness in her eyes as she said, For the past 3 years, I have worked hard to cultivate so that I can fight with you until the sky falls and the earth rends. All of this is not to prove how great I am, nor is it to prove that I have surpassed you. Instead, I want to tell you that I will take back the dignity that you have taken from me with my own hands. The heavens and the earth were silent. Only Longyang's voice could be heard. Everyone could feel Longyang's determination. Everything was for the sake of dignity. That is not all I have. Longyang tucked her fine black hair behind her ear as she spoke slowly. Come out, black phoenix purple jade body. As she spoke, a pitch-black cloud suddenly appeared behind her. The cloud was like a pair of wings, and it curled around Longyang's shoulders. Then it slowly flew up and turned into a huge black phoenix in the air. A black phoenix. It was said that this was a phoenix from the underworld. It guarded the path of death and specialized in devouring dead souls. It was one of the symbols of the underworld's gate. When the black phoenix appeared, it suddenly let out a sharp cry. The sound was so loud that it caused endless ripples in the Phoenix Emperor Spring. When the sound spread out of the Phoenix Emperor Spring, it caused countless people's eardrums to hurt. Even the city lords of the final world and some of the weaker ones had a drastic change in expression. This was because the sound wave was so terrifying that it caused their dantian to become unstable. Divine fetus. Finally, the 36th Dean said in a low voice, Divine fetus? Without a doubt, these 2 words were earth-shattering, and it caused endless ripples in the outside world. Longyang actually had a divine fetus. One should know that she had not shown her talent before, but she had already suppressed Lin Ling. Now she had even shown her talent. Martial God Wentianyu. Chapter 3979. Lin Ling's Eruption. Haha. You've misunderstood me. Martial God Wentian smiled when he saw Martial God Duanmai's astonished look. He also stared at Longyang. He was very satisfied with this disciple of his. He still remembered the first time he met Longyang. At that time, Longyang wanted to defeat him and become his disciple. Of course, Martial God Wentian didn't care about that. In this world, there were so many people who wanted to be his disciple. However, Longyang's next sentence moved Wentian Martial God. I want to kill Lin Ling no matter the cost. Wentian Martial God was moved because he saw Longyang's eyes. It was Longyang's life's mission. Longyang was willing to sacrifice everything, including her soul. Wentian Martial God accepted Longyang as his disciple. However, in the following days, he realized that Longyang was more powerful than he had imagined. She had grown rapidly in a short period of time. This also let him know that Longyang was a piece of unpolished jade. It was just that no one had ever carved this piece of jade. Missed you? Didn't you give her the dark phoenix violet jade body that represents the entrance to the underworld? Wentian Martial God smiled and shook his head. Duan my Martial God asked again. No, she got it herself. However, Martial God Wentian still shook his head, but his tone changed. The other talent was given to her by me. What? The Martial God's pupils trembled fiercely, and he quickly looked at Dragon Lady. Almost at the same time, Dragon Lady's body emitted billowing black fog again. This black fog coiled around Dragon Lady's delicate body and spiraled up. It became clearer and clearer, and it actually turned into a huge black dragon. This dragon coiled around Dragon Lady, making her look even more ferocious and ferocious. Dark Dragon Violet Golden Body. Duan my Martial God mumbled to himself. Another divine fetus? Double talents. The rest of the experts shuddered. One divine fetus was already terrifying enough. Who would have thought that Longyang had two divine fetus physiques? She would surely become a deity with such talent. Even in the Phoenix Emperor Spring, there were less than 5 people who were more talented than Longyang. Therefore, many people looked at Longyang as if she was a senior, a deity. Divine fetus physique. This woman is already so powerful when she's only a first-level martial god. What if she reaches the late-stage martial god realm? You don't need to say anything, she's the real Luli Empress. In the outside world, many people were even more envious because Longyang's advantages were too tempting. 4 Dantians and 2 divine embryos. Any one of these was enough for a genius to laugh proudly in the 9 provinces. However, all the advantages were gathered on one woman, the Empress. Perhaps this was how people viewed Longyang. At this moment, Dragon Lady was floating quietly in the Phoenix Emperor Spring. Around her delicate body, black neon energy swirled. A black phoenix appeared on her left shoulder, and a black dragon appeared on her right shoulder. The dragon and phoenix undoubtedly gave her an aura that could control one's soul. How are we going to fight? Seeing the majestic Longyang, a dean suddenly laughed. He was the dean of the E-Garden. He had never liked Lin Ling. That kid can't even resist the power of 4 Dantians. Now that he has 2 divine fetus physiques, it looks like Sister Longyang wants to win beautifully. Then a crafty and harsh voice sounded at the same time. She was naturally the Heaven Princess. Ha ha ha. The masters who didn't like Lin Ling couldn't help but laugh out loud. Wentian martial god. You've hidden your strength well. Your disciple's strength is no weaker than most of the people here. Duan, my martial god, was in a good mood. He turned to Wentian martial god and said. At this point, no one doubted that Lin Ling could win. Lin Ling had lost the 3-year promise. This showed how terrifying Longyang was under Wentian martial god's guidance. Lin Ling, on the other hand, was unlucky. He lacked a good backer. I don't want her to be stronger than anyone else. I just want her to be stronger than a kid who doesn't know his place. I think that kid will admit defeat in 3 moves. Wentian martial god smiled faintly as he looked at Lin Ling. He knew that the kid must be shocked speechless. Perhaps he would kneel down and beg for mercy. However, as soon as his gaze landed on Lin Ling, a blinding vortex appeared on Lin Ling's chest. It spun rapidly and grew bigger. The vortex was nothing special. However, Wentian martial god could sense a terrifying force exploding from the vortex like a bomb. You're using your full strength? Very well, I won't hold back. Lin Ling's calm voice finally came out from his mouth. There was no sign of panic or astonishment. It was as if he would not be surprised even if the sky collapsed. Bang! Everyone's eyes instantly turned towards Lin Ling. Their hearts felt as if they had been struck by a meteor and continued to explode. Bang bang bang. However, compared to the explosion in their hearts, the force unleashed by Lin Ling's body was even more terrifying. It caused the water of the Phoenix Emperor Spring to flow backward, causing the water to dry up. This is the force of the boundary. It's the half-martial god realm. This guy is about to have a breakthrough. He's about to undergo the tribulation of the ancestor. Following it, the crowd burst into a roar. Although the people outside could not sense the force of the Phoenix Emperor Spring, they could vaguely sense that something was not right. Bang! Almost at the same time, the vortex on Lin Ling's body finally exploded. It formed a terrifying gust of wind with Lin Ling as the center and swept in all directions. That power was so frightening that even Dragon Lady's long hair was blown up. Her pupils, without any suspense, narrowed. Half-martial god realm? And he didn't undergo the tribulation of the ancestor. She mumbled to herself. Her voice was filled with great astonishment. A half-martial god realm cultivator who did not undergo the tribulation. This was probably the first case in Huanyu's history. It's not over yet. However, before the crowd could recover from their shock, someone suddenly yelled in a panic. That voice seemed to rise again and again before the first wave had subsided. The reason was that Lin Ling's aura was approaching the martial god realm. Holy crap, what kind of freak is this? He jumped from the martial ancestor realm to the half-martial god realm and then became a martial god? I must be dreaming. How could such a thing happen in this world? A large number of terrified voices rose one after another. The reason was that the cultivation of the martial ancestor realm was calculated in hundreds of years. If it only took a dozen years to reach the half-martial god realm, that person would be considered a rare genius in the final world. On the other hand, if it only took 100 years to reach the martial god realm from the half-martial god realm, that person would also be considered a rare genius. However, Lin Ling had only taken 3 years to break through 2 levels in a row. Damn, this is so unfair. How are we supposed to cultivate like this? Chapter 3980. His cultivation kept rising. Calm down, the martial god realm has the tribulation of the gods. Lin Ling has broken through 2 levels in a row, so he will surely face the tribulation of the gods. Besides, his foundation is unstable, so he will surely fail. You're right, 2 levels in a row, that Lin Ling is being too impatient. Let's wait and see if he fails to overcome the tribulation. Perhaps it was because they were too jealous, thus many people were complaining that the grapes were sour. As a matter of fact, the old monsters in the Phoenix Emperor Spring were clenching their fists and murmuring to themselves. Most of them were cursing Lin Ling for failing the tribulation of the gods. They did not think it was fair either. How could these old monsters who had lived for 10,000 years accept the fact that Qin Nan had broken through 2 levels in a row? Bang bang bang. The terrifying energy continued to ripple out, but gradually the energy was restrained. Meanwhile, in the middle of the storm, the young man in a blue robe placed his hands behind his back and his hair drifted wildly. He wore a satisfied smile. Very well, I've finally achieved the martial god realm. The young man in a blue robe said in an excited tone. He seemed to be very calm. However, it was like a shocking bomb to the crowd. Air, give me a slap, I think my eyes are playing tricks on me. Why didn't I see him overcoming the tribulation? Pa! The sound of a slap was indeed heard. Following it, another person snapped, "You're not playing tricks on me, because I didn't see the tribulation of the gods either." What the hell? Without a doubt, a series of exclamations took place. Even experts like Wentian martial god rose to their feet, their faces trembling in fear. It was fine that the half-martial god realm did not have to overcome the tribulation. But damn it, the tribulation of the martial god realm did not even happen. It was so fucking unfair. Could it be that the kid was the son of God? Was he blessed by the son of God? As for Longyang, her eyes glittered as she stared at the young man in a blue robe. She discovered that the young man in a blue robe was extremely attractive and energetic. He no longer looked as down and out as before. No, the young man in a blue robe did not look down and out either. He had only been silent. Martial God stage. Longyang bit her lips and said unwillingly. However, a cold smile soon appeared on her face. So what if you're a martial god? You can compete with me. That's right. Longyang is also a martial god. Therefore, Lin Ling's breakthrough is just a flash in the pan. Duan my martial god spoke on behalf of Wentian martial god, as if he had suffered too much depression before. At this moment, Lin Ling acted as if he hadn't heard what everyone was saying. He stretched out a single hand and carefully comprehended the terrifying energy of the world essence within his body. For some unknown reason, after he advanced into the martial god realm, he seemed to have become even more familiar with everything in the heavens and the earth. It was the feeling of a god that possessed the power to control and be familiar with everything. No wonder martial god Wentian could sense everything about Lin Ling. So it was because of this mysterious feeling. Demigod elixirs are indeed terrifying. Lin Ling also muttered in his heart. After spending so much of his golden fleece flower to buy the medicinal pill, it did not disappoint him. The reason being that he did not need to overcome the tribulation. Besides, similar to the dragon god battle armor, the longer the pill was sealed, the stronger its power would be. Such a pity, if it weren't for the duel against Longyang, Lin Ling would not have unsealed the pill so soon. The reason being that Lin Ling had only achieved the first layer martial god realm after unsealing the pill. However, it was enough for him. The reason being that he had achieved the first layer martial god realm with his 6 stanchions. Lin Ling reached out his right hand and clenched his fist. A terrifying power burst out from it, causing the Phoenix Emperor Spring to crack open. The cracks continued to spread as if the Phoenix Emperor Spring was going to collapse. This inadvertent experiment had undoubtedly left all the experts who had doubted Lin Ling dumbfounded. They initially thought even though Lin Ling had achieved the martial god realm, there was a limit to his strength. However, Lin Ling had only clenched his fist. The force was so terrifying that it felt more like a sixth-layer martial god realm than a first-layer martial god realm cultivator. Especially experts like the Duan lineage martial god. As experts at the martial god realm, they naturally had the clearest evaluation of that force. Looking at Dragon Mother again, she seemed to have been struck by lightning, and her beautiful face was flushed red. Why? Why was this happening? Previously, Lin Ling was wearing the armor. They thought it was for defense, but to their surprise, it was to seal away Lin Ling's power. And now Lin Ling had unsealed some kind of seal, allowing his strength to improve tremendously. As a result, the power that Longyang had unleashed was nothing compared to Lin Ling's. Even though Lin Ling did not specifically target her, it served as a great slap to Longyang's face, allowing her to see her true colors. No, I still have the godly embryo. Of course, Longyang kept comforting herself. That's right, you have the twin godly embryos. Wentian martial god blurted out excitedly. He could not help but admit that Lin Ling was indeed related to Li Xiaoyao. He could sense that Lin Ling's boundary force was stronger than Longyang's, implying that Lin Ling's dantian was stronger than Longyang's. Therefore, he could not let Lin Ling go. He wanted to know all of Lin Ling's secrets. Now Lin Ling only needed to be defeated. Besides, it did not matter how strong Lin Ling's boundary force was when he was facing Longyang, who had the twin godly embryos. It's impolite not to reciprocate. Longyang, I'll show you the difference between us. At this moment, Lin Ling's gaze turned towards Longyang. His robes fluttered in the wind, making him look like a god, an indomitable giant. An aura that looked down upon the world surged out from his body. Fuse! Lin Ling bellowed. Even though he had broken through, the energy in his dantian had just been disintegrated, so it was still a little messy. He had to separate all these energies properly. Boom! The first to appear was the realm-swallowing beast, which turned Lin Ling's body black. Sixth grade ultimate desolate body. Lin Ling's aura rose crazily. Boom! The second to appear was the supreme netherwind dragon. Endless green astral winds tumbled as Lin Ling's legs turned into dragon claws. Fourth grade ultimate desolate body. The third to appear was the heavenly dragon's bone, which turned Lin Ling's hands into dragon claws. His aura rose crazily. Everyone's faces turned pale from shock. Lin Ling could still increase his strength? Heavens, this monster! The fourth to appear was the demon's great hell body, which made endless wings appear behind Lin Ling's back. Fifth grade ultimate desolate body. What kind of cultivation technique is this? He actually managed to fuse his talents. Right, we all forgot that he has a cultivation technique that can fuse talents. Now, his talent has probably reached the divine embryos. Even though it's at the postnatal level, it still belongs to the divine embryos. Does this guy not have a limit? Chapter 3981. How could they fight? Wentian martial god's pupils contracted. He had naturally heard of Lin Ling's innate talent fusion technique, but he had always thought that it was an unorthodox technique. But now, he felt that the combination of this technique and the primal chaos godly tactic was simply a flawless technique. I have a divine fetus. Lin Ling, no matter how much you stack your innate gifts, you're not a divine fetus. Longyang suddenly roared hysterically, because she had clearly sensed how fierce Lin Ling's aura was. She never would have thought that Lin Ling, who had been silent all this time, would be so crazy the moment the seal was lifted. She didn't want to lose to Lin Ling in the 3-year agreement. Boom! However, just as she finished speaking, endless golden flames erupted from Lin Ling's body. They scattered across the entire space, carrying with them a power that could crush one's soul. When he looked at Lin Ling again, his entire body was burning. Golden flames appeared on the surface of his body, constantly swallowing and spitting out. It was incomparably tyrannical. Most importantly, once this golden flame appeared, it was like the wrath of a human king, and everything had to submit to it. Some of the martial god realm old monsters in the distance suddenly felt like prostrating themselves in worship. This is the flame of the human sovereign. This brat. Right when everyone was shocked to the point they were unable to close their mouths, The unfettered sword martial god finally spoke. The flame of the human sovereign. Back then, the unrestrained sword martial god had tried to get close to the terrifying taboo of the demon primordial forest. However, he had no choice but to give up in the end due to his lack of strength. However, this terrifying flame was actually collected by Lin Ling. Flame of the human monarch, what kind of talent is this? Many people beside the unfettered sword martial god said anxiously. Divine embryo. The unfettered sword martial god said word by word. Silence. The whole place fell silent again. It was as if they saw a comet rushing into the sky, breaking the taboo of the universe and becoming the most ancient god. Without a doubt, the young man in front of him was a future deity, and he might even be a human king. Very strong power, but what surprised me was that there was actually a surprise. Senior Sister Yuer, thank you. At this moment, Lin Ling's words shocked everyone as he muttered to himself. Crackle. Under his release, the terrifying power of lightning suddenly erupted, and white lightning descended. Countless electric snakes coiled around the golden flames, as if they were roaring angrily, resisting the golden flames as equals. Looking at its power, it was actually not to be outdone by the golden flames. Everyone began to tremble at this sight. Although they didn't know what kind of power this white lightning was, if it could stand up to the divine embryo, then it meant that another divine embryo. What kind of divine embryos are these? Why do you have so many? Wintian martial god could no longer remain calm. He looked at Lin Ling as if he was looking at a freak. At the side, the corner of the Duan lineage martial god's mouth was also trembling. The fusion of all kinds of innate talents was already frightening enough, but this guy also had two kinds of divine embryos, and he was even trying to combine them. What kind of monster was this? As a matter of fact, I don't know either. However, Wintian martial god was infuriated when he saw Lin Ling spreading his hands helplessly. However, he really didn't know. He could only be sure that the divine embryo had come from the combination of him and Yuer. After all, Yuer's divine embryo had a chance of giving birth to divine embryos. The reason why it had given birth to a lightning divine embryo was related to Lin Ling's sixth dantian. His weakest dantian was the lightning element, and he had never encountered any good innate talents. Lin Ling had given up on that dantian, but it had given birth to a divine embryo. This made Lin Ling feel that his luck had suddenly taken a turn for the better. Crackle. The white lightning seemed to be ferocious. After clashing with the flames of the human emperor, it grew even stronger, causing the area within 1,000 li around Lin Ling to turn into a pool of lightning. Any early-stage martial god would be killed by the lightning, unless they also had a divine embryo. The crowd took a step back. They looked at Lin Ling as if they were looking at the most ancient taboo of lightning. Now that Lin Ling had become a martial god, no one dared to oppose him. Almost at the same time, far away in the 9 heavens of the divine world, an old man suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with astonishment. The lightning lock physique. Someone has given birth to the lightning lock physique. Go and find out who it is. Father Lightning Lock? Could it be the great god Lui's innate talent? Someone exclaimed as he ran over and saluted. Following this, more and more people appeared and yelled, Father, congratulations, there's a successor. Haha, I Lei Gong have finally met a person with a lightning divine embryo. The old man was clearly overjoyed. At the same time, in another void, another old man was traveling in the void. However, this time he was riding a huge scorpion. If Lin Ling was here, he would definitely recognize it. If it wasn't the terrifying world scorpion, what else could it be? It's been a long time since I've seen Xiaoyu. Lin Ling should be protecting her well. However, although Lin Ling is unruly, he's a man of principles and values relationships. Back then, he promised me that if anyone dares to touch Xiaoyu, they'll have to step over his dead body first. Therefore, I believe that under his protection, Xiaoyu will be safe and sound. The old man looked into the distance and suddenly said with a smile, he missed those two people very much. This was because they were the only two people that he still missed after becoming a martial god. However, at this moment a strange fluctuation arrived. His eyes narrowed and his body trembled. Following this, tears flowed out of his old eyes. Old friend Lei Locke, your inheritance has appeared. Haha, you've been dead for so many years. Finally, your descendant has appeared. In his excitement, he even knelt down toward the distant void. A jug of wine appeared in his hand and he poured it out of thin air. Brother, drink. In the battle of the gods you died protecting me. I Nanwufing will never forget this kindness. Now your glory has been arranged by the heavens and earth, and a successor has appeared. Even if I have to risk my old life, I'll raise your descendant. Bang bang bang. After the hot wine was poured, the old man kowtowed again. He kowtowed until the heavens collapsed and the earth cracked. The void exploded. At this moment, it was as if he had returned to his youth and participated in the battle of the gods. Lin Ling didn't know any of this. He only looked indifferently at the white lightning around him. He found that although the lightning was under his control, it was incompatible with the flame of the human monarch. It seemed that the white lightning was very mischievous. Of course, this was also because his soul power was insufficient. After all, his talent fusion was based on soul power. Then, did you admit defeat in this battle? Or did I beat you until you admitted defeat? Looking up, Lin Ling looked indifferently at Longyang. Longyang's delicate body trembled. Her eyes were red and filled with madness. She had lost all reason and endless unwillingness. In the end, they turned into helpless tears. Chapter 3982. Against martial god Wentian. Lin Ling's Jieyuan was denser than hers, Lin Ling's talent was greater than hers, and Lin Ling even had 2 divine embryos. No matter how one looked at it, Shi Longyang had lost to Lin Ling. Ironically, Shi Longyang had thought that after 3 years, she had already surpassed the man who had brought her darkness. However, this was all an illusion. Demon, he was still a demon. That night of humiliation was still haunting her like it was never going to go away. You are an evil spirit. Longyang pointed at Lin Ling and shouted. She cried even louder. No one knew how much effort she had put in for this day, and even more so, no one knew how she had spent these past few years. You are heartless and I am unjust. When you resent me, have you ever thought that if you did not want to kill me back then, you would not have ended up like this? I can only say that there are some taboos that you should not touch. Lin Ling shouted. His words made Longyang cry even louder, as if she had lost the motivation to live. You can admit defeat. Lin Ling took a step forward, and a terrifying aura came crashing down. Longyang bit her lips so hard that her small mouth was bleeding. She did not see it at all, and her hands were clenched into fists. At this moment her palms were pierced, but she did not feel it at all. She was not wrong. She was only fighting for the most precious dignity of a woman. However, why did the heavens torture her like this? They gave her hope and let her see the dawn of victory. But in the end, they made everything dark again. I admit defeat. Longyang stared at the cold man, and finally shouted in despair. This sentence seemed to have taken away all the hope in her life, making her feel as if she had fallen into an endless abyss, and there was no possibility of her ever rising again. At the same time, this also made her lose the motivation to live, because she felt that in this life, there was no hope of revenge. When they heard Longyang admit defeat, the world fell silent. On the Phoenix Emperor Mountain there was complete silence. Everyone's faces were dim, and they could only look at the godlike man. The first place of the newcomer king belonged to Lin Ling from the Snow Wind Academy. I did not expect the 3-year agreement to end up like this. Longyang lost without a fight. Someone said solemnly. Thinking back, it all felt like a dream. Because in these 3 years, Lin Ling relied on his own efforts to surpass Longyang. This sounded simple, but they all knew that the process was not easy. It could only be said that the youth in blue had put in 100 times more effort than them. Trash. Martial god Wentian was furious when he saw Dragon Mother admit defeat without even fighting. Because he'd spent so much effort to foster Dragon Mother, yet she'd suffered such an outcome in the end. His eyes is a murderous intent. Because he did not want trash, he wanted to take back everything he had given Longyang, including the 2 divine embryos. Then he moved. A terrifying fist mixed with ferocious energy blasted towards Longyang. Obviously, no one could react to this unforeseen event, because no one thought that martial god Wentian would kill Longyang. After all, although Longyang lost, her efforts and her glory could not be erased. If Lin Ling did not exist, Longyang would still be an existence that shone brightly in all 36 academies. So ruthless, is it useless and useless? The unrestrained sword martial god frowned. Of course, he knew that martial god Wentian had sacrificed a lot for Longyang. But Longyang lost. Therefore, martial god Wentian wanted to take back everything that he had sacrificed. Needless to say, from the beginning until now, martial god Wentian had not treated Longyang as a disciple, but only as a tool. However, the unrestrained sword martial god did not care about this. After all, this was the new heavenly court's matter. The crowd was the same. Instead, they narrowed their eyes coldly, watching the girl who had shaken the final world not long ago fall before their eyes. She's mine, I'll be the one to kill her. However, at this moment, a domineering voice suddenly appeared. Next, a fist mixed with lightning and flames descended, leaping past Longyang and colliding with martial god Wentian's terrifying fist. Boom! The collision was so fierce that it almost tore apart the Phoenix Emperor Spring. Countless experts were knocked down, and a large number of experts were pushed back, their expressions changing greatly. At this moment, everyone's attention was on the person who had suddenly attacked. Everyone wanted to see who dared to stop martial god Wentian. However, when they saw who it was, countless gasps could be heard. At the center, a terrifying force surged in all directions. The figures of two martial gods were clashing. Their long hair and robes fluttered in the wind, and their fists collided like meteors. One of them was martial god Wentian. However, the other person was the newly promoted Lin Ling. This was a clash between a new martial god and an old martial god. The crowd opened their mouths wide. Firstly, they did not expect Lin Ling to save Longyang. Secondly, they did not expect Lin Ling to clash with martial god Wentian's fist. It felt like the waves of the Yangtze River were pushing the waves behind. Of course, Longyang was the most shocked because she had been defeated by Lin Ling. She was disheartened and thought that she would never be able to surpass Lin Ling, so she had decided to commit suicide. However, the person who had saved her was Lin Ling. Lin Ling, are you crazy? Who asked you to save me? Longyang yelled hysterically. Piss off. Lin Ling's face was filled with a twisted expression. It was not easy to fight martial god Wentian with his current strength. If you're going to die, I'll be the one to kill you. Do you still remember that night? Haha, Lin Ling had a great time, but you Longyang had no choice but to die. It's fine for a trashy woman like you to die, but you'll be killed by me. Of course, I Lin Ling don't want to dirty my hands, because I don't kill trashy people. Therefore, if you're going to die, die somewhere far away, don't die in front of me. Lin Ling's voice was like a thunderstorm. You. Longyang was enraged. Trashy, you're disheartened by a mere setback. I Lin Ling am very disappointed in you. Lin Ling's eyes reddened. As he was fighting against martial god Wentian, his bones began to emit cracking sounds. He had exceeded his limit. Lin Ling, how long are you going to humiliate me? You won't let me go even if I'm going to die? Longyang's expression became twisted. Lin Ling's words were like endless mockery that penetrated deeply into her heart. I'm telling you, I'll kill you in my lifetime. Longyang let out a furious roar. She had gone mad. Her aura was as imperious as an empress. Rumble. What was even more frightening was that under her madness, the entire Phoenix Emperor Spring began to tremble. Dragon Mother's cultivation level had increased by another level. It was terrifying, as expected of an empress. Seeing this, Lin Ling's lips curled into a cold grin. Finally, she's not courting death? Soon after, his eyes were cast to the front. A trace of blood quietly seeped out from the corner of his mouth. Clearly, he was injured. Chapter 3983. The Powerful Wentian Martial God. You dare to save my men? Are you trying to provoke me? I've been giving in to you, but it doesn't mean that I'm afraid of you. It's because you're not qualified to anger me. Wentian Martial God looked at Lin Ling with a smirk in his eyes. It was a domineering aura. Provoke you? Don't you see it now? Lin Ling chuckled. He knew that the god-slaying martial god was about to begin. Everyone was shocked to see Lin Ling and Wentian Martial God going head-to-head. After all, Lin Ling was not strong enough to fight against Wentian Martial God. Furthermore, There was no need for Linling to go against Wentian martial god. However, those who were familiar with Linling knew that Wentian martial god was Linling's greatest enemy. Linling had been working hard to surpass this great enemy, and now Linling was finally making his move. Is this kid crazy? The unrestrained sword martial god squinted. He was aware of Wentian martial god's strength, and he was certain that even 10 Linlings would not be a match for Wentian martial god. It was undeniable that Linling was strong and outstanding. After reaching the martial god realm, he had immediately surpassed many martial gods. However, Wentian martial god was one of the strongest martial gods, the emperor of martial gods. The unrestrained sword martial god was half a step away from becoming a martial god. He has his own plans. At this moment, a voice came from the side. It was Miao Di. The unrestrained sword martial god let out a sigh and did not stop him. However, to his surprise, Miao Di knew Linling too. You're crazy. I didn't do anything to you, but you're provoking me. You killed my father in the past, and I've been thinking of ways to avenge him. In the sky, martial god Wentian suddenly withdrew his fist and floated back. He stood with his hands behind his back and looked at Linling indifferently. At this moment he fully displayed the bearing of a martial god, and he was like an emperor. Linling waved his numb fist and retrieved the tyrannical song sword, and the true inheritance dark sword. Then he looked at martial god Wentian and said, maybe you can think of me as crazy, but I do want to test your strength against you. So how about we fight? His voice caused ripples in people's hearts. They were finally certain that Linling really wanted to fight Wentian martial god. As expected of a lunatic. Oh, martial god Wentian grinned, we can fight. But if you lose, I'll take you away, what do you think? Previously, Longnyang had been defeated, which made it difficult for him to make a move against Linling. However, he did not expect that Linling would take the initiative to deliver himself to him. At this moment he was obviously going to capture Linling, and extract all the secrets from Linling. After all, he knew that Linling was Lei Gong's subordinate. If Linling did not agree, he would not be able to make a move against Linling. Sure. Linling nodded and said with a smile, but if you lose you'll die, what do you think? Boom. The crowd was shocked once again because Linling actually thought that he could win. Deal. Wentian martial god was startled. Then the cold smile on his face deepened. Their words were tit for tat, and sparks were flying everywhere. Duan my martial god and the experts of the new heavenly court smirked when they saw that Linling had agreed. This Linling had overestimated himself. They could foresee that Linling would not be able to withstand more than 3 moves. No, they even guessed that Linling would not be able to withstand even 1 move. This was because they had all witnessed the strength of martial god Wentian. Let's begin. Wentian martial god was the first to speak amidst the silence. Strands of flowing light drifted out from his body and coiled around him like endless ribbons, causing him to suddenly become dazzling. Moreover, an irresistible aura of dignity silently swept out from him. Godly energy. Moreover, it was clearly an extremely strong strand of divine energy. Looking at his boundary essence, it could only be described as a brilliant heavenly might. The reason for that was because his world essence was so thick that it was even more terrifying than any martial god. 5 dantians. Linling's eyes flickered and he licked his lips. He knew that this battle would be difficult. However, since he dared to come, he had already planned to fight with his life on the line. Boom! Almost at the same time, a terrifying boundary essence storm erupted from Wentian martial god's body. It was like an endless ocean, causing the entire Phoenix Emperor Spring to tremble. The weaker martial gods were sent flying. Their faces were filled with solemn expressions as they were sent flying backward. Longnyang gritted her teeth. She had mixed feelings. She never thought that Linling would dare to fight Wentian martial god. She could not think of any reason. Could it be to save her? That was impossible. Everyone had their own thoughts, but Linling didn't have the time to care about them. His expression became focused, and deep in his eyes, it seemed like he could even see the boundary essence of Wentian martial god clearly. At this moment, the meditation he had done before coming to the Phoenix Emperor Mountain was effective. It made him even more focused. He was not affected by Wentian martial god's powerful aura at all. Almost at the same time, the The boundary essence ocean in front of him finally exploded. Then countless figures appeared, filling the sky with experts. These experts were practicing martial arts. They were either punching or kicking. However, those seemingly simple movements carried the rhythm of the great Tao. Everyone's pupils trembled. What kind of technique was this? Obviously, they could not see through Wentian martial god's technique. Wentian martial god is as cautious as ever. Facing Lin Ling, not only did he not use a huge boundary essence to suppress him, he even used a divine ability. Far away, the city lord of Blizzard City, Song Chiri, said solemnly. He obviously knew that Wentian martial god treated Lin Ling differently from ordinary martial artists. He is very cautious. Not far away, the dean of Blizzard Academy nodded. When martial artists fought, they were most afraid of such people. A lion would use all its strength to hunt a rabbit. Whoosh! A terrifying boundary essence aura flooded towards Lin Ling, causing explosions to sound around Lin Ling. Because Wentian martial god's boundary essence was too huge, it was difficult for Lin Ling to resist the attack before it even reached him. At present, even his physical strength and 6 dantians could not withstand the storm. However, a large number of divine armors appeared around Lin Ling's body. With the help of the countless divine armors, he blocked Wentian martial god's boundary essence attack. Just as he blocked the attack, Lin Ling's eyes flashed. The tyrannical song sword appeared in his hand and he forcefully slashed behind him. Because he knew that it was just a boundary essence attack. The real attack had just arrived. Moreover, Lin Ling was very familiar with Wentian martial god's previous moves because Li Xiaoyao had taught him that martial art. That kind of martial art made it difficult for the opponent to distinguish the real from the fake. Next, the real attack would be like an arrow in the dark, instantly arriving. Chapter 3984. Fatal Killing Intent. When Tian martial god dashed forward, his leg turned into a whip and kicked at the void. His kick carried a terrifying force and a storm as it aimed at Lin Ling's head. The strength of this kick was probably able to sweep through 90% of the martial gods. Furthermore, not many people were able to see through the mysteries behind this sudden attack. However, Lin Ling was already prepared for it. Not only did the dominating song sword not stop, it slashed forward like a meteor and resisted the kick. Boom! At the moment of collision, a terrifying force surged out, causing Lin Ling's expression to change slightly. Although he had expected it, he did not expect Wentian martial god's strength to be so strong, because that kick actually caused the tyrannical song sword to hum non-stop. Ka. Wentian martial god's fatal blow was blocked by Lin Ling. However, Lin Ling's surroundings continued to rumble. The godly armor that he had previously released had all exploded. Wentian martial god's eyes flashed with shock. Firstly, he didn't expect Lin Ling to be able to guess his intention of attack and take precautions in advance. Secondly, he had never imagined that Lin Ling would actually be able to block his attack. One had to know that his boundary essence surpassed Lin Ling's by so many times. Even if Lin Ling was able to guard against his attacks, it was absolutely impossible for him to block it. How extravagant! He actually used a large number of divine armors to dissipate that power. Wentian martial god stared at Lin Ling's surroundings and discovered Lin Ling's trump card. Let's see how many divine artifacts you have. Martial god Wentian suddenly turned around in the air and withdrew his leg. He reached out his hand and clenched it into a fist, as if he was controlling the universe. Upon seeing this, Lin Ling's eyes flashed. He waved his left hand again, and a large number of godly armors appeared. With the defense of the godly armors, he raised the tyrant song high up and then smashed it down in front of him without any regard for his life. Rumble! The sword slashed at Wentian martial god's fist, creating a storm that soared to the sky. However, Wentian martial god's fist was unscathed. His eyes flashed with a cold glint as he opened his fist and turned it into a claw. He grabbed at Lin Ling's tyrannical song sword. It seemed like he wanted to destroy the sword. Go! The tyrannical song sword could not be taken away, so Lin Ling quickly waved his left hand, and a large number of divine weapons flew toward martial god Wentian's claw like moths. Crackle! Countless divine artifacts exploded, erupting with firecracker-like sounds. The two of them clashed crazily in the void for more than 10 rounds. As they watched the intense battle between the two of them, the onlookers were undoubtedly shocked speechless, because they never expected that Lin Ling would actually be able to hold on for so long. This could be called a miracle. That brat is really rich. He actually used countless divine artifacts as cannon fodder. Witnessing the battle between the two of them, the experts of the new heavenly court had gloomy expressions. They clearly knew that Lin Ling would not be able to block a single attack from Wentian martial god. However, Lin Ling relied on his divine artifacts to block the attack. Each divine artifact displayed 50% of its power. As long as there were enough of them, they could form a powerful defense. Haha, it's just a last-ditch struggle. I want to see how many treasures he has to use as cannon fodder. However, Duanmai martial god chuckled because Lin Ling's battle style was a battle between rich people. Let's see how rich Lin Ling could be. As for Wentian martial god, he was naturally cautious. After a dozen rounds with Lin Ling, his eyes turned cold. For some reason, he had a feeling that Lin Ling was stalling for time. What's wrong? Are you panicking? However, just as he thought of something, Lin Ling seemed to have guessed it and suddenly smiled. For some reason, Wentian martial god did not like this smile because it was too mysterious. It was as if he knew everything about Wentian martial god. Wentian martial god did not want to be controlled by others, including his own thoughts. The one who should be panicking is you. Martial god Wentian chuckled coldly. He no longer hit his trump cards. He floated in the air and spread his arms. A gentle jade-like glow suddenly appeared. The glow rotated and turned into jade-like stones that scattered across the sky. From afar, Wentian martial god looked like he was in a sea of jade. Seeing this, Lin Ling's expression changed slightly because he knew what Wentian martial god was doing. Lin Ling immediately waved his left hand and threw out a large number of treasures. They were controlled by his soul and world essence. Next, Lin Ling used a few consumable treasures to increase his speed. His speed gradually reached 5,000 world speed, then 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, and finally 10,000 world speed. These treasures were all bought by Lin Ling from the store of God. They were finally showing their effects. Furthermore, Lin Ling was still not at ease and had scattered all of his divine weapons. There was a hint of madness in his eyes. Looking at the two of them preparing their ultimate moves, everyone swallowed their saliva with difficulty. They had a premonition that the next clash would determine who was the real winner. You are truly formidable. You were able to detect the technique that I used earlier. Why do I feel that you seem to be very familiar with everything about me? If not for the fact that your cultivation level is too low, you would truly be a formidable opponent. Wentian martial god squinted his eyes when he saw how quickly Lin Ling had set up the battle. He could imagine that if Lin Ling's cultivation was the same as his in the future, he would not be a match for Lin Ling. Luckily, Lin Ling was too impatient and dared to challenge him now. There was no future for him. 8 Stones Heart-Piercing Sutra. Wentian martial god made his move too. A terrifying invisible wind blew. Wentian martial god was still floating in the distance. The jadeite stones around him were still like meteors. However, Lin Ling suddenly exploded. Rumble. The explosion of this power was extremely terrifying. It could easily destroy 10,000 worlds. What's going on? The crowd was shocked. They did not see Wentian martial god's attack at all. Could it be a soul power trick? Even if it's the power of a god, there will still be ripples. Some seniors exclaimed, "It's the heartbeat." However, an expert who was slightly familiar with Wentian martial god said in a serious tone, "That attack is invisible and moves according to the heartbeat. As long as there's a heartbeat, it will cause the jadeite stones to explode. As for the power of the explosion, I'm sure you've seen it. It's Wentian martial god's signature move. Heartbeat. A martial artist should be able to control the heartbeat easily. What if there's no heartbeat?" Chapter 3985. Lin Ling's counterattack. It's useless. As long as there's a trace, the jadeite will be able to sense it. In fact, rather than sensing the heartbeat, it's more like sensing a melody in the void. Regardless of whether it's a human or a ghost, as long as they appear in the void, there will be a melody to prove that they're in the void. What a terrifying move. It's powerful and fast. Who can stop it? Lin Ling's reaction was quite fast. Otherwise, he would have died in battle. The crowd was in a heated discussion. Lin Ling was constantly retreating, and with every step he took, his body exploded. Countless divine artifact fragments spilled out in a beautiful display. It was conceivable that if Lin Ling had not mentioned setting up those artifacts, he would have been killed long ago. Boom boom boom. Even so, Lin Ling was still in a bad situation. He had already activated the speed of 10,000 worlds, but he was still affected by the ferocious power. If not for his strong physical body, he would have been killed. Then, he looked into the distance and saw that there were still many Jadites. This made him know that he had to endure this fierce battle. Boom boom boom. Time passed quietly. The Phoenix Emperor Spring was like a forbidden area in the mortal world. People saw that the treasures that Lin Ling scattered were exploding. This made many people lick their lips and their eyes turn red. Because Lin Ling had too many treasures on him. Could it be that this is his trump card to fight Wentian martial god? Some people even began to speculate. Yu and the rest covered their mouths. Their eyes were filled with worry. Although Lin Ling looked miserable, they knew that it was already impressive that Lin Ling could last until now against a giant like Wentian martial god. However, they hoped that Lin Ling could last longer and turn the situation around in the end. In fact, in the entire 36 academies, the only person who could withstand so many moves from martial god Wentian was Lin Ling. Although Lin Ling also relied on the power of the treasure, it was still a pride that could not be erased. Boom! With a few final loud explosions, the Phoenix the Archspring completely collapsed. The fragments of the void fell down like glass. The Phoenix Emperor Spring, a place that even the top 10 martial gods of the 9 prefectures could not break, had collapsed at this moment. From this one could see how terrifying the power was. Lin Ling is dead. Martial god Duan Mai said all of a sudden. He was trying to sense Lin Ling, but Lin Ling's aura had already disappeared. Lin Ling is dead? Even the unrestrained sword martial god and the others narrowed their eyes before their expressions changed drastically, because they couldn't sense Lin Ling's aura anymore. This meant that Lin Ling had been defeated. In the end, he still couldn't block it. When the crowd heard the voices of the experts, they also sighed in their hearts. This was the first time in history that a student had fought against a martial god. In the end, it still ended in failure. Haha, is he dead? Isn't that the son of the undying demon Lin Ling? Oh, he's dead. I'm so disappointed. However, after a moment of silence, a loud laughter suddenly rang out. In the void far away from the Phoenix the Archspring, a young man was laughing. If one looked carefully, who else could it be but Duan Wuhan? At this moment he seemed to be happier than Wentian martial god. It was as if he was the one who had killed Lin Ling. Looking at Princess Tian, who was not far away, the corners of her mouth cracked open, revealing a satisfied smile. Following this, many people laughed out loud. The son of the undying demon, Lin Ling, was still going to die in the end. It's too early to be happy. That guy is not dead yet. However, at this time, a cold voice was like a splash of cold water, directly sprinkling on their heads. Most importantly, it was Wentian martial god who had spoken. At this moment, Wentian martial god's face was cold. Moreover, as he looked forward, his expression became increasingly ugly. This was because he did not expect that Lin Ling, who had just stepped into the martial god realm, would still be alive after his terrifying attack. At this moment, a huge vortex began to appear in the void in front of them. Then a figure slowly walked out of it. As he walked, he said, "The top 10 martial gods of the 9 prefectures are really powerful." The person who had walked out was none other than Lin Ling. Looking at the lively Lin Ling, everyone looked as if they had seen a ghost. The son of the undying demon. This legend was really immortal. However, Wentian martial god also laughed. Although Lin Ling was not dead, he obviously knew what kind of trump card Lin Ling relied on. He said indifferently, 3 undying fruits. Tsk, I didn't expect you to be so rich. Of course, knowing was one thing. However, he did not expect Lin Ling to have prepared so much for this battle. However, the undying fruits are still external objects. He's still alive this time. Next time it might not be so. Wentian martial god's eyes flickered coldly as he said coldly. Lin Ling stood in the void and stretched his neck slightly. He finally looked at Wentian martial god and said with a smile, "I don't think there will be a next time." As soon as he finished speaking, his originally dispirited aura finally burst out. Although it was not as terrifying as Wentian martial god's, he had taken the initiative to attack. His aura was not as strong as Wentian martial god's, but his determination was stronger. Wentian martial god's eyes turned even colder as he carried Lin Ling forward at the speed of 10,000 worlds. He was one of the top 10 martial gods of the 9 prefectures, yet this puny Lin Ling did not treat him seriously. "No matter what, I will destroy your confidence and capture you." Wentian martial god clenched his fists. An unprecedented energy burst out from his body. It was even stronger and sharper than before. The Phoenix Emperor Spring shattered once again. The void turned into glass. The experts of the new Heavenly Court wore cold expressions when they saw Lin Ling taking the initiative to attack. This Lin Ling must die. Lin Ling represented the God Extermination Alliance. He had repeatedly provoked the new Heavenly Court and Wentian martial god. Their patience had reached its limit. On top of that, they had watched Lin Ling grow up step by step. From the Qingzhou continent to the God Extermination Formation, to today's confrontation with Wentian martial god. Therefore, they knew that if Lin Ling did not die, the new Heavenly Court would not have a place to stand. This guy has relied on all kinds of treasures to survive until now. He should focus on defense. Isn't he courting death by attacking? Doesn't he know how terrifying Wentian martial god's talents are? 10,000 worlds will be destroyed if he touches him. Duanmai martial god wore a disdainful smile when he saw Lin Ling taking the initiative to attack. He clearly knew that Wentian martial god's talents were a terrifying taboo. It was like a drum. Not only did it have a terrifying defense, it could even produce a heartbeat when attacked. It could even send back 2 or 3 times the power of the attacker. Chapter 3986. Godslaying. Just as he finished speaking, Wentian martial god's boundary energy finally reached its peak. Boundless divine energy poured out. Behind him a giant heart appeared. It was like the heart of an ancient giant, beating slowly. However, with every beat, the heavens and earth would explode. The destruction of this power not only affected the Phoenix Emperor Spring, but also the outside world. This was Wentian martial god's talent, the primordial sovereign's heart. According to legends, this talent was left behind by Wentian martial god's teacher. It was extremely powerful and could transform into a primordial god. Rumble. The terrifying force attacked. However, Lin Ling did not retreat. Instead, he sped up. Especially when he saw the primordial sovereign's heart. His eyes shone with hysteria. Because the primordial sovereign's heart was one of Li Xiaoyao's talents. Unfortunately, before Li Xiaoyao could use this talent, he was killed by the 3 from the Tian family. Now that he saw this terrifying talent, the flames of revenge in Lin Ling's heart burned even more intensely. It was time to settle the grudge of 2 lifetimes. Mirage Incense Burner. With a wave of his right hand, 3 incense burners flew out and burned the divine incense. This incense burner was a consumable treasure. It could reduce the opponent's speed by 30%. Absolute soft leaf cauldron. Glazed light floated out. Another 2 ancient cauldrons appeared. The glazed light shone out and covered the entire void. Once this cauldron appeared, it could reduce the opponent's boundary energy by 40%. Thousand Leaves Divine Bamboo Formation. Large amounts of bamboo fluttered out like butterflies. They grew with the wind until they were the size of an ancient mountain. They shrouded the surroundings and reduced the opponent's defense by 30%. Not enough. Lin Ling's eyes grew crazier. This time, he spat out all his treasures and used all his trump cards. As they saw Lin Ling's crazy counterattack, all the powerhouses paled. The treasure that appeared in the sky made them feel a terrifying pressure. Destruction, annihilation, sharpness, and eternity. They never imagined that Lin Ling's counterattack would be so sharp. However, the top experts narrowed their eyes, especially the Duanmai martial god, who had a disdainful smile on his face. This Lin Ling has a lot of tricks up his sleeves, but doesn't he know that Wentian martial god's counterattack will be even more ferocious? 10% of the attack will be doubled. Perhaps after this clash, Lin Ling will be completely annihilated. Another expert beside him nodded and said. At this moment when Tian Martial God also sensed Lin Ling's madness. However, his cold smile deepened. Behind him the giant heart began to beat, forming mysterious ripples. However, at this moment 3 mysterious runes appeared in Lin Ling's hand. As soon as they appeared, an even more ancient aura burst out. What? He has more tricks up his sleeve? At this moment the Duan my martial god and the others were shocked. This was because they also sensed that the 3 runes Lin Ling took out in the end gave them a huge pressure. Since they were already in such a state, when Tian Martial God naturally felt it even more. His pupils contracted. Dong dong dong. He controlled the heart behind him and it began to rumble violently, trying to return all the power. However, at this moment, the 3 runes suddenly unleashed a ferocious forbidden aura that surrounded Wen Tian Martial God. He felt like he had lost connection with the world. Oh no, my power! Wen Tian Martial God shouted with a hint of panic in his voice. Then, he thought of the mysterious power from before and his heart trembled. What was it? How could it be so powerful? He did not know that the 3 runes were the curse of the gods. They came from the store of God and there were 5 of them, but Lin Ling had taken all of them. Moreover, the curse of the gods was not only sealing Wen Tian Martial God's boundary essence, but also his talent. While Wen Tian Martial God was still in shock, Lin Ling had already appeared before him. His face was cold as he stared at Wen Tian Martial God. Wen Tian Martial God felt a sense of familiarity. He immediately suppressed his shock and looked at Lin Ling in disbelief. However, behind Lin Ling, 3 majestic banners appeared at the same time and stabbed into his back, making him look like a divine general. Wen Tian Martial God, it's time for you to die. With a wave of his right hand, one of the banners appeared in Lin Ling's hand. He held it with both hands and swung it forward like a sword. This was the Great World Destruction Banner, which had the power to kill a martial god. It was the Universal Judgment Banner. It was clearly a treasure left behind by a god. In your dreams. Wen Tian Martial God immediately yelled. Even though he was terrified, there was no way he would back off now. Boom! He gathered all his strength and slammed his palms forward with mountain-toppling force. However, after clashing with the ferocious Great World Destruction Banner, his expression changed greatly. This was because he sensed an unparalleled force from the banner. After his palms collided, they immediately broke apart under countless shocked gazes. Blood poured out from his skin. What? Looking at this terrifying scene, everyone was shocked. Lin Ling had injured Wen Tian Martial God? It's that banner. Duan my Martial God was no longer as confident as before. Clearly, he did not expect Lin Ling to have the strength to injure Wen Tian Martial God. Furthermore, Wen Tian Martial God seemed to be weaker than before. His talent, speed, defense, and even his boundary essence were much weaker. Of course, the most important thing was his talent. That terrifying talent seemed to have been sealed. You! Wen Tian Martial God spat out a mouthful of blood and roared furiously. Die! However, in the sky, Lin Ling took out another banner and swung it down like a battle axe. Wen Tian Martial God's face turned even paler as a terrifying force surged toward him. He had never thought that this day would come, nor did he expect Lin Ling to be able to injure him. However, he quickly came to his senses. Recalling everything that had happened, he suddenly felt that Lin Ling had come prepared. I've waited 2 lifetimes for this day. I've prepared for 3 years for this moment. These 3 years of hard work were not to defeat Longyang, but to kill you. Lin Ling held the banner and kept roaring. Rumble! The giant heart behind Wen Tian Martial God instantly disappeared. Clearly, without the support of his boundary essence, his powerful talent could no longer be utilized. The giant banner was like a sword. As it swung down, Wen Tian Martial God spat out a mouthful of blood. He was in a sorry state. It was his first time showing such a sorry state in front of the world. The power of the second banner made his dantian feel like it was about to collapse. His bones were broken, but they were recovering rapidly. Wah! He spat out a mouthful of blood. Clearly, he was severely injured. Seeing his appearance, the crowd was scared out of their wits. Chapter 3987. past and present. Longyang trembled. She did not expect Lin Ling to target Wentian martial god instead of her. As for the unrestrained sword martial god and the others, they were in a panic. They looked at Lin Ling as though he was the god of death. This was because someone who could threaten the top 10 martial gods of the 9 continents was too terrifying. Retreat. Wentian martial god could not care less. A key appeared in his hand and he raised it into the sky. Rumble. The space was torn open, revealing a black hole the size of a human. Wentian martial god immediately charged toward the black hole upon seeing it. This shocked the crowd. Wentian martial god was running away? Moreover, he had the key to leave? This was the Phoenix Emperor Spring. Unless a martial god gave permission, ordinary people had no right to leave. Lin Ling was shocked when he saw Wentian martial god running away. However, how could he let go of such an opportunity? He had used up all his treasures to kill Wentian martial god. If he let Wentian martial god escape, all his efforts would be in vain. Bang! The void exploded as Lin Ling chased after Wentian martial god. Fortunately, the seal was still there, so Wentian martial god was not too fast. You're courting death. Seeing this, the Duan lineage martial god suddenly shouted. However, just as he moved, a sword appeared in front of him. At the same time, an indifferent voice floated out. This is their business. Duan my martial god, it's best if you don't interfere. Moreover, both of them have agreed to this battle. The person who stopped Duan my martial god was the unrestrained sword martial god. Although he did not know if Lin Ling could defeat Wentian martial god, he saw that Lin Ling had sacrificed everything for this battle. Therefore, he would do his best to help Lin Ling. Duan my martial god was infuriated when he saw unrestrained sword martial god attacking. However, he knew that unrestrained sword martial god was not weak. Although unrestrained sword martial god might not be able to defeat him, he could not help Wentian martial god anymore. After Lin Ling disappeared into the black hole, the Phoenix Emperor Spring fell silent. The crowd felt like they were still in a dream. They did not expect the battle to end with the heaven-seeking martial god running away and Lin Ling chasing after him. He has prepared a lot of treasures to seal Wentian martial god, but they have a time limit. So as long as Wentian martial god is, Lin Ling will be the one. Suddenly someone said indifferently. Many people nodded Wentian martial god. At this moment, 2 martial god Wentian martial gods martial god. The one in front was obviously martial god Wentian. At this moment he looked like his soul was about to shatter. He never thought that he, one of the 10 great martial gods of the 9 continents, would run away one day. However, he knew that there was still a chance. As long as he could get through this period, he would be able to return to his peak. Lin Ling was moving at full speed behind him. He knew that Wentian martial god could come back from the ashes. Furthermore, Lin Ling's treasures were weakening. He did not have much time left. Little Kunlun. This moment Lin Ling shouted. Wang! Black ripples spread out from Lin Ling's arm. Then they turned into a huge primeval forest and sealed off the entire area. The terror of this primeval forest also caused the expressions of the martial artists who were passing by in the distance to change drastically. Then they were confused and quietly retreated. In the primeval forest, Lin Ling finally slowed down. Wentian martial god was already trapped. At this moment, Lin Ling realized that his heart had calmed down. There was no excitement or emotion. It was so quiet that he could hear the wind in the universe. He looked at the panicking man in the distance and sighed softly. The 10 martial gods of the 9 prefectures sounded majestic. However, when death approached, they were just like ordinary people. They were even worse than ordinary people. Because they were in a high position, they were used to controlling everything. How could they give up on everything when they were about to die? Who are you? Wentian martial god kept attacking the black vines. When he realized that he could not break through them, he finally looked at Lin Ling. The young man in front of him had returned to his normal self. His face was calm and his eyes were calm. However, this time Wentian martial god saw a familiar light in the young man's eyes. He thought about how amazing this young man was and shook his head. He was extremely depressed. Tonwan Valley, long time no see. At this moment, Lin Ling finally spoke. Do you still remember how the 3 of us drank and chatted in the valley? Wentian martial god's body trembled violently. His face turned pale as he stared at Lin Ling. He had already guessed it before. However, after hearing Lin Ling's familiar voice, he was certain. Impossible, this is fake, it must be fake. However, martial god Wentian kept shaking his head. We've investigated your reincarnation and even your past life, but the result is that your soul has been destroyed. It's impossible for you to be reincarnated, so how could you be resurrected? My sister and I have read the underworld life and death record. There's no news about you in there. It's as if you've never appeared. Unless you're a god, it's impossible. Moreover, we use the 3 lives Pluto smoke to track your next life. However, we couldn't find you in this vast universe. So why are you back now? The underworld life and death record was an important treasure of the underworld. It recorded the origin and past life of every person and every god. Only those who had surpassed this void would not enter the record. However, they couldn't find Li Xiaoyao's past life. As for the 3 lives Pluto smoke, they could track his next life. However, they couldn't find him either. It was as if he had never been revived. Hearing this, Lin Ling's eyes flashed. He didn't expect the 3 from the Tian family to do so much to guard against him. Lin Ling was also puzzled because Long Yang had also checked Lin Ling's past life. However, she could only find Li Xiaoyao. She couldn't find anything after that. As for Li Xiaoyao's reincarnation, Lin Ling, he didn't come from this void. He came from Huaxia. Could it be that Huaxia blocked the 3 lives Pluto smoke? Lin Ling couldn't help but recall what happened in Huaxia. There were endless myths and legends there. Panga created heaven and earth and Vaiwa created man and so on. Chapter 3988. You'll have to pay for it sooner or later. No matter what, I'm back. Shaking his head, Lin Ling looked at Wentian martial god and said, Wentian, how have you been these years? Yes. Brother Xiaoyao, we've been well, very well. Yes. Looking at Lin Ling, Wentian martial god didn't have the domineering aura he had in the past. Only respect. And this brother came from the bottom of his heart. He knew very well that without Li Xiaoyao, he wouldn't be Wentian martial god. He even knew that he relied on Li Xiaoyao's legacy to reach his current height. If Li Xiaoyao didn't die because of them, then the 4 gods today would have become 5 gods. Li Xiaoyao's potential was the most terrifying one he had ever seen since he started learning martial arts. Especially the primal chaos formula. It was a supreme technique that even gods didn't have. He had also investigated it. It was said that in the ancient era, those who had 9 dantians were supreme ancient gods. That's good, I'm relieved to see you all grow. Yes. Hearing this, Lin Ling nodded. Brother Xiaoyao, can you let me go? Yes. Wentian martial god suddenly looked up at Lin Ling. His eyes filled with anticipation. Back then we were blinded by greed. That's why we made such a mistake. But these years we've realized our mistakes and we've been thinking about you, especially my sister, she's always talking about you. In this life, you're her first and last man. Yes. I know you've missed me, but you're afraid that I'll come back. Lin Ling said. People will always make a mistake, but we've realized our mistakes. Yes. Wentian martial god suddenly kowtowed. He was truly regretting it now. He finally knew that although he seemed to have killed Li Xiaoyao wasn't actually dead. He was just temporarily gone. Wentian, you know my personality. I hate betrayals the most. You should also know that I'm a magnanimous person. Free and unfettered for my entire life. Once I've decided on something, I'll definitely carry it out. Yes. Lin Ling said as he looked at martial god Wentian. There was a hint of nostalgia in his eyes. After all, the Tianwen Valley was one of Lin Ling's family members after all. I know. Yes. Wentian martial god's face turned gloomy when he heard this. He was familiar with Li Xiaoyao, so he was even more familiar with Li Xiaoyao's personality. Li Xiaoyao's temperament seemed to be free and unfettered, but he also abhorred evil. What he had to do, he would not be lenient. Your sister should be here, leave your last words. Yes. Lin Ling said Wentian martial god die. The grudges of the heavens. I don't know what last words I should leave behind. I can only say that the days I spent in the little valley were the happiest days of my life. Yes, Wentian martial god sighed as he recalled everything he knew about Lin Ling. He couldn't help but shake his head. Li Xiaoyao was indeed Li Xiaoyao. Even though he had to start from the beginning, he was still extraordinary. He had returned from the lowest existence to the peak of his glory. Lin Ling didn't say anything. The last flag appeared in his hand, and he threw it at Wentian Martial God. He knew that if he didn't take revenge now, Wentian Martial God would regain his strength. At that time, even though Wentian Martial God still cared about their old friendship, no one could guarantee that he wouldn't eliminate his greatest enemy for Lin Ling's sake. Every man for himself and the devil takes the hindmost. There must be a reason for this saying to be passed down. Wentian Martial God's face was ashen as he looked at Lin Ling's flag. In reality, he didn't have any thoughts of resistance. Perhaps Li Xiaoyao had left too much of a shadow in his heart. If Tian Liuli hadn't taken the initiative to make a move, then with his cautious nature, he would absolutely not have dared to make a move against Li Xiaoyao. Whoosh! Martial God Wen Tian was still kneeling on the ground, but his body was starting to darken. He stared at Lin Ling indifferently. His heart was filled with unwillingness, but more than that he felt guilty. In the end this guilt vanished into thin air. Therefore he smiled. Perhaps he had carried this burden for too many years. Now that Li Xiaoyao had killed him, he could finally let go of the burden. The grudge between him and Li Xiaoyao was finally over. You'll have to pay for what you came for. Lin Ling turned and left, softly leaving behind a few words. These words were also a farewell to his family and friends. Moreover, he poured a pot of hot wine into the air, as if he were telling the story of his time in the small mountain valley. A martial god had fallen. The power of the great heaven world-destroying banner was indeed terrifying. With 3 banners in hand, even an expert at the top of the pyramid of the 9 prefectures couldn't withstand it. Not only was his world origin destroyed, his divine energy and even his life force was destroyed. Unfortunately, there were only 3 of these banners. If there were more with these treasures, no one in the final world would be able to match Lin Ling. Walking along the void, Lin Ling suddenly felt his heart relax. It was as if half of the heavy stone that had been weighing down on his heart had been lifted. As a person of 2 lifetimes, the ups and downs of the past, the burdens that he had to bear, had lessened by quite a bit. In fact, Lin Ling was soft-hearted and almost wanted to spare Tianwen Valley. After all, Lin Ling was a sentimental person. When Wentian Martial God called him Brother Xiaoyao, Lin Ling was reminded of everything that had happened in the past. But in the end he still took action, because this was his greatest mission since he started practicing martial arts. At the same time, it was also to free Tianwen Valley. Although Tianwen Valley had betrayed Li Xiaoyao, it was obvious that he wasn't the mastermind. He was cautious to the point of being timid. If no one took the lead to bewitch him, he wouldn't have betrayed Li Xiaoyao. Those who weren't ruthless enough would have scruples when doing things. After the incident, they would feel guilty. This guilt was like an inner demon that had been suppressing Wentian Martial God's heart for a long time. As for the leader, it was Tian Liuli. Tian Liuli used to be the purest and most innocent girl in the Tian family. However, she was also the one who had changed the most. Humans will always be complicated creatures. They will grow and change. Tian Liuli was a woman who changed for power. Rumble. At this moment, a roar came from the distance. Upon closer inspection, a large number of dazzling streamers were shooting towards them. They were so fast that it seemed like they would arrive in the blink of an eye. Is Tian Liuli here? Lin Ling stopped in his tracks and his eyes became serious. He knew very well that when Tianwen Valley was escaping, they must have asked for help from his sister, Tian Liuli. However, Lin Ling didn't expect Tian Liuli to come so quickly. Chapter 3989. 18 Types of Weapons. The void passage opened by Tianwen Valley is still there. Let's use that passage to leave. Lin Ling turned around and flew back the way he came. However, even though his speed was fast, those people were even faster. Whoosh! A dart suddenly shot over, containing a terrifying Jiayuan energy. From the looks of it, it was most likely a Jiayuan of the middle stage martial god realm. However, this dart was extraordinary. When it shot over, it passed through the void as if it was traveling through another world. Then, it appeared in front of Lin Ling in an instant and stabbed into the void passage. Rumble! The void passage opened by Tianwen Valley let out a roaring sound as if it was about to collapse. Divine power. Lin Ling's eyes became serious as he stared at the fatal dart in front of him. This was because the force of divinity in the dart felt extremely thick to him. It was even more terrifying than the force of divinity in his legacy, the Nether Sword. And now the void passage was about to collapse. Lin Ling had to immediately rush into the void passage. Otherwise, if the void passage collapsed, Lin Ling could only leave through the universal void. With his speed, there was no way he could escape Tianliuli's pursuit. Moreover, the only powerful methods he had left were the two curses of the gods. These two great methods were simply unable to kill Tianliuli. Who are you? At the same time, an angry shout came from behind him. Looking back, Lin Ling discovered that there were more than a dozen men in armor behind him. These men were majestic, and they were all riding golden horses. They were like divine generals. And what surprised Lin Ling was that he didn't see Tianliuli for the time being. Who are you? Lin Ling didn't rush into the void tunnel. Instead, he looked coldly at these people and said, those people were like stone sculptures. They were motionless and only looked at Lin Ling with calm eyes. However, there was also a ruthless color in that calmness. Divine Paladin. Finally, someone calmly opened his mouth. His voice was still filled with an unfeeling and indifference. Holy Knights of God? Lin Ling's eyes flashed. It wasn't difficult for him to guess that this group of people had come for him. Moreover, they were the Divine Paladins. This meant that these Divine Paladins had come on the orders of the Empress. Are you guys from Luli Empress? Lin Ling asked indifferently. However, those people acted as if they didn't hear Lin Ling's question. They continued to stare coldly at Lin Ling. Who are you? The cold voice floated out again. Looking at their disdainful expressions, Lin Ling's eyes turned cold. He sneered but didn't say anything. I asked you a question but you refused to answer. You're courting death. Finally, someone let out a cold shout and clamped his legs on the golden armor mystical horse. A long halberd appeared in his hand and shot towards Lin Ling. A golden light flashed out, as if a bolt of lightning had suddenly appeared in the void. The domineering aura was extremely surging. Middle stage of the martial god realm. As soon as the other party released his realm core strength, Lin Ling immediately sensed his cultivation level. However, before he could react, the golden light appeared in front of him. The sharp long halberd was aimed at Lin Ling's chest. What a fast speed! Lin Ling's expression changed slightly. This speed had probably reached the speed of 4,000 realm core strength and 500 realm core strength. Clang! The tyrannical song sword appeared in Lin Ling's right hand, and he slammed it hard against the long halberd. Then, a powerful force came from the halberd and shocked Lin Ling so much that he almost lost his grip on the tyrannical song sword. However, Lin Ling made use of the rebounding force to turn his body and shoot to the other side. Humph! A cold snort was heard. The man clamped his legs and the mystical horse neighed as he chased after Lin Ling. 4,000 realm core strength? As he shot forward, a disdainful voice was heard from the expert's mouth. Almost at the same time, Lin Ling also fused his innate talent. His strength, defense, and speed increased dramatically. His speed had also reached 4,800 realm core strength. Since he had a breakthrough, the power of his innate talent fusion was obviously not the same as before. Xiao! The golden long halberd shot over and pierced through Lin Ling's waist. Lin Ling dodged it. However, the sharp power of the golden halberd made Lin Ling feel a cold sensation on his waist. Being dodged by Lin Ling, the expert was surprised. 4,500 realm core strength? Lin Ling mocked. Previously, this expert had mocked Lin Ling for only having 4,000 realm core strength. Now Lin Ling was mocking him as well. Then Lin Ling stretched out his right hand and the tyrannical song sword spun in his hand. Then, he grabbed it tightly and slashed at the long halberd in front of him. Crackle! This slash carried with it a fatal danger, and there were golden flames roaring within it. Clang! A crisp sound was heard when the tyrannical song sword collided with the halberd. A golden flame spread out in a destructive manner, making the halberd even more dazzling. It was also golden in color, but it was more brilliant than before. Huh! The eyes of the expert flickered. He immediately sensed that he had lost control of his halberd, as if it had been assimilated. He was infuriated. He did not expect the ant in front of him to be so powerful. He clearly sensed that his opponent's cultivation was only at the first layer martial god realm. On the other hand, he was at the 7th layer martial god realm with the 10th grade ultimate desolated body. Even with his strength, he still ended up in such a miserable state, which made him feel humiliated. Whoosh! While he was immersed in his astonishment, a giant hook suddenly slashed at Lin Ling's waist. From afar it looked like a giant crescent moon. A hook! Lin Ling's heart skipped a beat. He stomped his feet in the air and flew up like a spinning top. As soon as he shot into the sky, the deadly moonlight passed under his feet. If he was slightly slower, Lin Ling would definitely be slashed in half. This caused Lin Ling's pupils to constrict. These people were very powerful. If there was only one of them, Lin Ling would not be afraid. However, there were 18 of them. Besides, he believed that Tian Lili was about to arrive. If this dragged on, Lin Ling would be at a disadvantage. You're able to assimilate my golden halberd. The expert who used the halberd said coldly when he saw Lin Ling dodging the attack. Another golden halberd appeared in his hand, which surprised Lin Ling. He had already assimilated the halberd. Why would another halberd appear in the guy's hand? It's his talent. At this moment the giant ghost's voice was heard. The giant ghost had always been beside Lin Ling. As it was in the form of a fist-sized ghost, most people did not notice it. Talent in weapons? Lin Ling frowned when he heard this. That's right. Furthermore, these 18 people all have different talents in weapons, which correspond to 18 different types of weapons. The giant ghost continued. Most importantly, their talents are the 10th grade ultimate desolated body. Chapter 3990. The female empress had arrived. These people were all talented in weapons. Furthermore, they had 18 types of weapons. What was even rarer was that they were all 10th grade ultimate desolate bodies. To gather such experts, one would probably need to search the entire universal void. From this, it could be seen how terrifying the master behind the scenes was. And while Lin Ling was still in shock, a golden whip suddenly appeared out of nowhere. It wrapped around Lin Ling's waist and was constantly contracting. Lin Ling instantly sensed that a portion of his strength had been sealed. Caught him. And in the distance, one of the 18 people said coldly. His expression and aura remained calm, as though catching Lin Ling was as easy as flipping his hand. All right. The others immediately nodded. They naturally knew how powerful that whip was. It was likely that the youth no longer had the strength to fight back. Crackle. But at this moment, a terrifying aura erupted from Lin Ling's body. Endless white lightning spewed out in all directions. It was overbearing and majestic. It actually followed the whip and swam towards the 18 people. From the looks of it, it was as ferocious as a dragon. Not good. The expert who used the whip finally had a change in expression. As for the others, their pupils constricted as they leaped towards that person. Powerful realm essence erupted from their bodies to resist the sudden power of the lightning. Pwah! However, the tyrannical lightning wreaked havoc, causing everyone to taste a sweetness in their throats. They nearly spat out a mouthful of blood. Divine embryo. Their pupils constricted. That youth had 2 divine embryos? For such a divine embryo to land in the hands of such trash, it's truly a waste. Someone said angrily. Since we can't have it, let's destroy it. Another person said coldly. Up to this point, their attitude towards Lin Ling was still arrogant. It was as though no matter how powerful Lin Ling was, he was still a mortal ant. As for them, they were the holy knights of God and had a supreme status. Nonsense, have you said enough? In the distance, Lin Ling could not help but shout angrily when he saw that he could not break free from the chains around his waist. You're angry just like that? Mortals are indeed mortals. They will never know the majesty of God. Someone said with a sneer. Come out. At that moment, Lin Ling waved his right hand and a large amount of dragon chi appeared. Then it turned into many huge demonic dragons. These demonic dragons were all at the early stage of the martial god realm. However, there were many of them. The moment they appeared, they immediately charged toward the 18 people with surging baleful chi. What? At this moment, the 18 of them seemed to have lost their arrogance, and their eyes were filled with rage. This mere mortal actually had so many tricks up his sleeves? Form the formation. Someone suddenly shouted in a low voice. The rest of the people narrowed their eyes and made complicated seals with their hands. Then golden light shone brightly, illuminating the entire void. After a moment, 18 different weapons appeared in the void. They were overflowing with killing intent, but they were also majestic. And when these golden weapons were connected head to tail, they were able to unleash a power that was twice as strong as before. For a time, the dragon demons found it difficult to break through. Lin Ling's eyes flashed. These 18 people could still form a formation, and the power of this formation was extremely strong. However, after the demonic dragons appeared, the whip that was tied to his body also disappeared. This caused a strong killing intent to appear on his body. You talk so much and act so arrogantly. Now you can only hide like a tortoise. After saying this sarcastically, Lin Ling went all out. He unleashed all his power and joined the attack. Upon hearing his words, the 18 golden weapons trembled visibly as if they were enraged. However, just as their anger rose, a terrifying sword slashed across the void. It was mixed with surging realm essence and physical strength as it slashed toward the 18 weapons. Lin Ling was obviously using the suppression of the demonic dragons to unleash his power without restraint. Rumble. This slash immediately caused one of the 18 people's talent to become unstable. His dantian also became turbulent. As for the 18 weapons, when one of them was affected, the others were immediately affected as well. Bastard! A furious roar came from the 18 weapons. They had received Luli Empress order to capture a person alive. They initially thought it would be a trivial matter, but to their surprise, the person who had just arrived was only a first-layer martial god. Yet he had so many trump cards that he was able to injure them. That being said, they were most infuriated by the demonic dragons. If it weren't for the demonic dragons, they would not be suppressed like tortoises. And that was indeed the case. Lin Ling went all out, swinging his greatsword and smashing it down continuously. However, after a dozen or so strikes, he suddenly frowned. Vaguely, he also sensed a familiar feeling. Bang! As soon as Lin Ling sensed it, a terrifying shockwave exploded from one of the 18 people. The shockwave was so terrifying that it directly destroyed the rift. The realm essence was as strong as a god's. Among the 18 people, the powerhouse with the whip walked forward step by step. Her body exuded a boundless might. She slowly took off the mask on her face, revealing a rather attractive face. Her eyes were staring at Lin Ling calmly. Empress! The rest of the people dropped to their knees when they saw the woman. Their eyes were filled with respect. They knew the Empress was still far away, but she had forcibly occupied someone's body and descended upon this world. Luli Empress! Lin Ling's eyes shuddered when he saw the woman with an imperious aura. Everything that had happened in the valley suddenly echoed in his ears. The words Brother Xiaoyao felt like it had just happened yesterday. He could not deny that he used to be fond of that naive girl too. Following it, he smiled. The glamorous woman smiled too when she saw Lin Ling's smile. She looked at Lin Ling as if he was an old friend. What was surprising was that even after thousands of years, the two of them were still very calm. They were not even agitated. Perhaps this scene had been rehearsed countless times in their hearts. They both had the same intuition that one day, they would see each other again. Brother Xiaoyao, you're finally back. After a moment of silence, Tian Liuli slowly opened her mouth. Her greeting of Brother Xiaoyao was as intimate as the girl next door. On Tian Liuli's beautiful face, her eyes revealed a touch of gentleness. It was hard to imagine that such a domineering empress could reveal a gentle side. Yes, I'm back. Lin Ling nodded. He knew that he had killed 2 people from the Tian family. With Tian Liuli's intelligence, she must have guessed it. Tian Liuli seemed innocent in the past, but she was also the most shrewd of the 3 in the Tian family. Even Li Xiaoyao was fooled by her. I've been waiting for you for a long time. Tian Liuli also nodded and smiled. This smile also made the 100 flowers dim. Her smile was filled with boundless vigor.